Chapter 18. Actions have consequences. It is a statement as old as time has recorded. When the ninth Lord himself arrived onto the mortal plane for the first time in a few millennia, not one of his numerous clones or his spirit occupying a newborn body, but the Lord himself the world noticed. Those who were particularly tuned into the world and could recognize the signs also took notice. The witches of the other side were the first to notice and as such were able to act quickly and shield the Lord from the notice of others. As such it was they alone who watched, listened and learned as he acted and set other things in motion. Though they did not like to do so, some of them also acted when things needed to be shifted in order for Naruto's plans to work as he intended. Despite this, however, they did not interact with him, not even indirectly. They had even gone so far as to reinforce the walls so that he could not access their dimension, though none believed they could stop him if he was truly determined. Throughout it all, one figure merely observed, taking in everything yet not reacting in the slightest. They watched not just Naruto but everyone he interacted with that were connected to their world, whether that meant the Mikkelsen siblings, the IMF witches or slayers, and in turn anyone they interacted with, such as the werewolf packs and lichens. Finally, after learning all they could, not just through their own observations but the observations of others, they acted. Naruto was in the midst of meditation when there was a nudge at the edge of his awareness, the psychic version of a polite knock. Moving his awareness there, he found a door, ornate and wooden, with the image of a tree carved into it. Upon spotting it, he raised an eyebrow as its energy was the same as that of the other side, and after a moment of surprise he shrugged and opened the door, which swung inwards. Stepping through it, he was immediately in another location, no longer in his mind but in another location entirely. He stood in the vastness of space with a sea of stars surrounding him. In the center of the space was a table and a pair of chairs sitting as if on solid ground despite nothing being beneath them. Already there was someone seated at the table, a woman, young but extremely beautiful, with long dark, curly hair and wore a long purple dress. Approaching her, he took the empty seat across from her. "Thank you for meeting me," said the woman. "I was curious, it seemed a lot of energy went into preventing my interaction with those on your side of the veil," said Naruto calmly. "I wanted to see what you did before any interaction on this side. While I know I could not have stopped it if you were insistent, I am glad you accepted my wishes," said the woman. "And now?" questioned Naruto. "I find myself intrigued. Your actions have changed the destinies of many who would have otherwise perished early, and incidentally allowed me to correct a few things as well," said the woman. "Such as Esther's bastardized immortality spell. She robbed those children of their humanity and turned them into monsters. Your serum gave me the opportunity to fix it. They will remain vampires, but the bloodlust and the need they feel to cause carnage has been corrected," said the woman. "I cannot fault you for that, Lady Ketsuya. I too have seen my work bastardized by others. Now I suppose you already know what my goal is," said Naruto. "I do, and while I am not opposed to it and will even aid you in your endeavor, there are provisions for my doing so," said Ketsuya. "Oh, and what would they entail?" questioned Naruto. "While I did not initially intend for it to become so, this place now acts as a prison for some true monsters such as Michael. I am not comfortable releasing them back into the world, especially powerful ones," said the woman. "Understandable. I have a friend on another version of Earth who owes me a favor. He is in the perfect position to take on your bad seeds," said Naruto. "Next, Silas and Amara. I cannot let them off lightly. The two of them getting together I could have gotten over, but using me to create a spell to gift them immortality, preying on me to go against my own morality and using love to justify it, I cannot forgive. No, just as you paid for this action, so too must they. Both will die, and I shall see to it that neither of them rests easy," said Naruto. "The last is not a must but one I must bring forward. You intrigue me, in a way that not even Silas, for all of his charm, could do. I wish to know what it is to know love for true and be loved in return for true," said the woman. "You know that you could not be my only woman. I am aware. I have watched my descendant as well as Willow, Buffy, Faith, Alexia, Nikita and Alexandra. I have seen your interactions with all of them and theirs with each other. Somehow you love all of them for true feelings they return and in turn share with each other. Somehow my observations awakened feelings inside me and I wish to explore them," said the woman. "That would require a body," said Naruto calmly. "That is easily done. When the veil drops I will be able to resurrect myself, in my true body. You will need to meet Hinata. You are a very powerful witch but there are things about magic that only she knows. If she gives you the okay then I will consent to that." "Very well. Now then there are other things you need to know that I believe will be of use. For starters, Rebecca Michelson found high school to be a rather strange experience. While it was not the first time she was a student or even an attendee in a learning institution, Mystic Falls High was quite different than anything in her memory. Most of the students seemed more concerned with everything but their classes, which was an incredible thing for her. She was over 1,000 years old and as such she remembered times before education was deemed as important. She doubted it would have ever been important to her had she never become a vampire. She had been trained to be a wife and mother in the age of Vikings and had been part of a rather modest family at that. After they became vampires, and they started posing as nobles, she had been provided a very high-quality education which continued everywhere they eventually fled to. Because of this she had an understanding and appreciation for learning that her new classmates seemed to lack. At the same time it was obvious that these public schools didn't really care for education either, and it was not just in Mystic Falls. Klaus and Elijah had explained it to her, stating that it was all about power, or rather maintaining it for certain people in power now. He had explained what he had observed and informed her of how he predicted things would develop down the road. She had already decided if things worked out as she hoped, her children would be sent either to a private school or be homeschooled. Of course there were some who were actually quite studious. She had met a few people who dumbed themselves down in order to better fit in with their social groups. That had surprised her, and when she asked for many it was born out of a desire to not leave behind their friends and rather comfortable life. These people realized what came after they were finished with school and had decided no to rush it if there was no absolute need to. Because of this perspective, Rebecca had taken the time to actually get to know people, and because of this was having a rather enjoyable school experience. Even with all of that, her purpose for being there had never escaped her. She was here to gain a husband, and that was the only reason she was remaining here. Naruto had come to see her and Niklas at their current residence and asked them to just stay out of trouble, not to bring attention to themselves and not to kill anyone. This year was a trial for her to prove herself, prove that she could control her impulses, and if she succeeded she would be allowed into Naruto's harem, and he would claim her. He had planted the images in her mind of her being claimed, bent over face down with her ass in the air, head pulled back as he pulled her hair, pressing her back against his chest as he lightly choked her while she watched herself being fucked in the mirror. She had never been more ready to be fucked in her life. She had lived for a long time, had many lovers, but no one had ever claimed her. Some of her past lovers had made her fall for them, but none had ever been strong enough to claim her, to break her on their cock. Naruto was more than strong enough to do so. He knew it and she knew it. As such, she had never been more turned on than in that moment. She had, however, needed to do something she had not anticipated: take the serum. That had been something Niklas had insisted on. He had noticed his cravings had vanished, something all of her brothers had also noted, as well as the calm that had descended on them. Since becoming vampires, their emotions had always swung from one extreme to another, though all of them had calmed since then. After taking the serum, she had noticed the same things had happened to her, though thankfully Naruto informed them he could turn her even after her enhancements from the serum, as he was still a higher level existence. Hastily she shoved those thoughts away and turned her attention back to the lesson at hand. Not far away from her, Bonnie regarded her silently. She had been observing Rebecca for the last month since she first arrived at the school. She was thankful that Rebecca wasn't the spoiled vampire princess that she had feared she would be. In fact, she was much like a normal girl in most aspects. Of course, now that they knew of what some of the changes the serum made on the original spell that created vampires, they all understood. She had not had good thoughts regarding Esther Michelson for forcing such a life on her children in the first place, but how she had destabilized their minds and emotions had really dropped her opinion, especially regarding her ability as a witch. Turning her attention away from the vampire, she shifted and glanced to the empty seat behind her. Naruto had decided to skip the day, sending a group text stating that something had come up and telling them all to come to the boarding house after school. Whatever he was doing, she hoped it wouldn't be anything too dangerous. She was getting used to living a peaceful life again. Naruto did not make a habit of going to different Earths impulsively. The multiverse was a huge expanse of space with each universe having their own rules. Despite this, Naruto, based on his title, had a foothold in every world in the multiverse and multiple personas in several of the more powerful ones. Regardless of this, there were always preparations that needed to be made before he could step into any universe, even the one in which he was born, as each place was able to handle different levels of his power. This universe was amongst the weaker realities in the upper echelons of power. It was in truth a mundane universe and rather forgetful. With one exception, it was the home of an aspect of the great tree that took on a more humanoid appearance. When he appeared, it was with nary a whisper in an alley in Los Angeles, and thanks to his preparation he knew all he needed to navigate the area as if he had lived there. He walked the city streets with no one paying him any mind, as he was dressed rather casually and appeared as if he was in either his late 20s or early 30s. Walking into a building, he was soon entering an empty club, which made sense considering it was barely past 7 in the evening. "I sensed someone powerful, but I didn't expect it to be you," came a voice that caused him to look over to the stairs on his right, revealing a young-looking though short woman with black hair in a princess cut. "Ah, Azrael. It's been quite some time. How's the leg?" "Healed, thankfully." "So what brings you to this universe?" answered the woman before quickly firing off a question of her own. "Actually, I'm in need of a bit of assistance that I figured your brother could help me with." "Tell me, where is Lucifer? I can't sense him." "He's gone back to hell. It's been nearly 80 years now," said the woman, getting him to frown. "Perhaps I can be assistance, Lord Naruto," came a new voice, causing both to look up at the balcony to see a man standing there, bald with dark skin. "Amenadiel, I almost didn't recognize you without hair," said Naruto calmly before ascending the stairs. "You seem different. Your energy is calmer, more potent, yet there is none of the agitation I'd expect," said Naruto, eyes narrowed. "It's been quite some time since we last met. I've done a lot of changing. My father has retired. I'm God now," said the man. "Then perhaps you can help me with this." When Naruto walked into the boarding house, it was packed to bursting. His regular group were all there, as were the Michelsons, Boruto, Willow, Buffy, Faith and Xander. When he walked in, the room went silent, though he ignored it, walked over to the table and poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey. He downed the drink and sighed before pouring himself another 2 fingers and taking a seat in the high-backed chair that by now the regulars knew was reserved for him. "Dad, you okay?" questioned Boruto upon sight of him. "I haven't been this mentally exhausted since you were a child," said Naruto, causing Boruto to wince. "I have just spent an inordinate amount of time trying to straighten out this clusterfuck of a reality," said Naruto, massaging the bridge of his nose. "I had a meeting this morning with Ketsuya," said the blonde, causing several eyes to widen. "As in the witch who created the other side, that Ketsuya?" questioned Elena, shocked. "Yes, and the meeting proved most enlightening. She is willing to open the walls of the dimension and release those trapped inside, but it required actions on my part," said Naruto. "Oh, and what, pray tell, did she desire in exchange?" questioned Elijah, eyes narrowed. "For starters, a place to put all of the true monsters that reside there, such as Michael, Jasmine, Glory, the Beast and a whole host of other nasties." "Aside from Michael, I am unfamiliar with those names," said Amelia. "We're not. They're demons, ones that our group put down," said Faith, eyes narrow. "What did you do?" questioned Willow. "I called in a favor from a friend. Lucifer Morningstar." "Lucifer, like the devil Lucifer?" questioned Jeremy. "Not like. He is the devil. It explains why you're so tired crossing universes like that and in so little time between them," said Boruto. "Indeed. However, when Lucifer and I arrived back here, we discovered that there was a dimension similar to hell already here, and a pretender called Arcadius playing devil. After he was dealt with, we were able to link his dimension with hell, and it's become something of an extension." Once the other side is down, they will be instantly sent to hell, said Naruto. Sounds good to me, said Faith. There's got to be more. This is too easy, said Stefan. 3 things. First is Esther. You should know the witches on the other side punished her severely, both for the usage of the immortality spell and for twisting it and turning you into vampires. They did this by forcing her to endure the pain of all of your victims. Every person you killed, whether you were in control of your actions or not, she has felt their pain. Initially they were going to let her try her hand at killing you all, however, as she is the root cause of a lot of this mess, she too has been sentenced to hell, explained Naruto. Good. It is no less than what she deserves, said Klaus darkly. Niklas, despite your grievances against her, she is still our mother, stated Finn softly. Perhaps to you that means something. To me, any good she may have done in that role is tarnished in the knowledge that she was the cause of all of my suffering in the first place. After all, Michael would have had no need to focus his ire on me without her spells hindering my physicality. No, brother, that woman was no mother to me, said Klaus. What else? Questioned Damon, in no mood to hear more Mikhailson family drama, especially if they didn't need to deal with it. Next is Silas, the person the other side was built to contain. Time passed, and before most realized it, several months had gone by. Caroline's 18th birthday had come and gone with a party that was well deserving of the occasion. While she had not initially been feeling up to it, by the time it was underway she had been well in her element. Because of who she was and her personality, many people not only attended, but she'd gotten more gifts than she knew what to do with. The highlights had been a beautiful diamond bracelet she received from Klaus, and Naruto's gift, which was a sword, specifically a katana, the blade of which was made of Damascus and the handle was purple with white diamonds. To those who stuck around long enough, seeing Caroline handle the blade gave them a new perspective on her. She was no longer just an insecure girl, but a young woman, a warrior, one that was perhaps still learning, but one who would accomplish great things. Due to the promises made to try and not cause problems, senior year had so far been working out great. Caroline, Elena and Bonnie had all returned to cheerleading and had been joined by Rebecca. That could have proven to be an issue, but remembering her purpose, Rebecca decided to not overexert her influence and as such decided to just blend in and have fun instead of trying to take over. Matt was in the zone and was showing it so far, having a perfect season. To make things fair, Stefan had decided not to compete, and Tyler, who'd become a hybrid just prior to the start of the semester, had his powers bound by Naruto for the duration of the season. Despite this, it didn't seem to matter, as Matt was having the season of his life and many were ecstatic, as it looked like he would take the Timberwolves all the way to the state championship. The Michelsons, now temporarily residing in Mystic Falls, decided to throw a ball in their new mansion. Despite their reservations, all of them went and would admit they had a pretty good time, as the Michelsons appeared as a normal if rather well-off human family. Unfortunately, tragedy struck not long later, as Caroline's father, William Forbes, was hit by a truck, and while he made it to the hospital and through surgery, he died a few days later from complications after refusing Caroline's offer to heal him. While he knew what his daughter was and accepted it, there was a part of him that was just too wary of the supernatural. Caroline, as a result, was a mess, with Elena, Bonnie, Stefan and Naruto doing their best to be there for her. Unfortunately for the lot of them, this was only the beginning of their problems. Alaric woke with a groan, only to freeze upon the realization that he couldn't move. Looking around, he quickly realized why, as both his arms and legs had been bound and he was lying what seemed to be a stone altar. "The fuck?" stated the man, straining as he tried to free himself. "I apologize, but times are desperate." The voice had him looking over and seeing a young woman kneeling near him. She was young, perhaps 17, with dark brown hair that was cut short and wore a pair of black jeans and a matching tank top. On the ground in front of her was a stone bowl, the contents of which she was currently crunching, he would guess due solely to the other stone in her hand. "What? Who?" questioned Alaric, his voice raspy. "My name is Esther Mikhailson. Though admittedly I certainly don't look it. As for what's happening, Alaric, it is simple. You are to be my countermeasure, specifically my hunter. Admittedly, this is not how I wanted to do things, but as I said, times are desperate. Mikhailson, Klaus, my son, and amongst my greatest failures. I love my children, all of them. However, in my zeal to protect them, I made mistakes and as such turned them into monsters. You are going to help me correct that mistake. Why? You voluntarily became a hunter to avenge your wife, did you not? My husband, Michael, did much the same after seeing the monsters we turned our children into, though from what I could see on the other side he was just as big a monster. You'll be different than Michael though, or any other vampire hunter that has or currently exist. In my time trapped, I've watched this world and learned. My mistake was not in giving my family power, it was in making my spell sacrificial as well as making the consumption of blood a requirement. You'll be different though, still human but greatly enhanced. You will have all of the powers of the slayers created by the Shadowman, only without the demonic influence. You'll have the hunter's instinct that both the Brotherhood of the Five and the Huntress possess, though not as severe. I'll admit this was not my original plan. The original plan was more drawn out and would make you a stronger version of Michael. I think, however, this is a better alternative. Now there is still much preparation to be done. Sleep. Naruto frowned as the memories of a dispelled clone faded from the forefront of his mind. He'd known instinctively things were going to well, and as such shinobi paranoia had him tagging everyone in his immediate circle with clones. Esther being back amongst the living could cause some serious problems, though she wouldn't be for long. Normally he would simply sit back and observe how they handled this, but in this instance he didn't want to be distracted from his current tasks. Still, he would admit that the power-up she was giving Alaric made him curious, so he couldn't really blame the clones too much for waiting to take her out until after that was done, though how she got her hands on some of Alina's blood eluded him. Still, there was nothing he could do about it personally at the moment. At the moment he wasn't even in Mystic Falls, instead he was in a hotel room in Denver. Unlike his normal trips, it wasn't Bonnie or his brothers or even Boruto he was traveling with. Instead he was with Elena, as she'd asked him to go with her to get Jeremy from Denver. Having decided he was going to get back into baseball, he'd gone to visit a friend he'd met at a baseball camp a few years back to help him catch up on his training. His thought on the matter were broken as Elena chose just that moment to enter the room with 2 coffees in hand. You know, we really could have chosen a faster way to get here, said Elena, handing him a cup. True, but I wanted to get you away from Stefan and Damon for a while, said Naruto, shrugging. Bonnie said you didn't see me and Stefan working out, said Elena with a sigh. I didn't. Stefan sees an idealized image of you. Because of this he didn't see any of your faults, nor did he push back against you or challenge you in any way, said Naruto with a shrug. But you also knew Matt and Caroline wouldn't work, said Elena. That was obvious. He was still clearly hung up on you for a while. You know Caroline, do you really think she'd put up with that for too long, said Naruto. Point. What about Rose and Damon? That one could work. Rose challenges him, forces him to think and not just rely on his impulses. She's older, so she's forcing him to grow up as a result. He's coming to accept who he is, not just what he is, said Naruto. Is that why you encouraged him to leave me alone? Questioned the girl once they were in the car. You two could have worked for a bit. The problem was he was going to change who he was, not because he wanted to but because that's what you would have wanted. Eventually he'd have turned bitter and hateful because it wasn't something he was doing for himself, explained Naruto. For a few minutes the room was silent as Elena was clearly deep in thought. Naruto was perfectly fine with that, however, as it allowed him to enjoy his coffee while he pretended to watch the news. Eventually she shook her head and he knew that she was out of whatever spiral her thoughts had taken her to. I've been wondering, what are you going to do next year while we're in college, I mean? Questioned the girl. I'm not sure yet, it depends on where you go and how dangerous it is, said Naruto. I'm hoping to avoid danger actually. That's why we were thinking of going to Whitmore next year. Well, that one's pretty safe now. Didn't used to be, but I took care of that for good a while back. That's actually how I met your father, Grayson, explained Naruto. What, seriously? I thought you knew him in high school, questioned Elena. No, my clones knew them. I myself met your father at Whitmore. He thought I was a vampire until I corrected him on that assumption. He and John were trying to figure out what I was from that point forward, as they quickly also ruled out werewolf. Said Naruto, chuckling. Did you ever tell them about our connection, that I'm your super distant granddaughter? Questioned the girl. No, but it's so much distance between us, there's no point of even counting it. At this point you and I don't share a blood connection, not even a weak one. Sorry if that ruins your incest kink. Said the blonde with a shrug. I don't have an incest kink. Said Elena quickly, only for him to remain silent. I don't. Exclaimed the girl, only for him to laugh. It's not funny. Carol Lockwood sighed as she looked out of her office window. The past year had been hard on her. Before Richard's murder their marriage had been on shaky ground, and she believed if they couldn't work through it they would have been heading for divorce. Then the vampires returned, as they always seemed to, and those problems had suddenly seemed so minor to them, things had been coming together. Then John returned, someone she never liked even when they were kids, and gotten her husband killed in his stupid plan. Of course this was only after Sheila Bennett had died, leaving the Bennett family without a matriarch, and as such allowing the tomb vampires to escape. She hadn't known that tidbit initially, but had only learned that from her former son-in-law, who'd sworn her to secrecy. Apparently his ex-wife was supposed to have become the next matriarch, but had sacrificed her magic to take down a serious threat a bit over a decade ago. The next in line, Bonnie, their daughter, was both too young and had not been a practicing witch for long prior to that point. He had only told her this as he suspected he knew why her husband had been affected by the Gilbert device and why simultaneously Tyler had his accident. According to his research, the Lockwoods descended from werewolves, and the Bennetts may have only been staying in town to watch them and make sure they didn't become active threats until the tomb became an issue. It had only been a suspicion, however, one that she didn't learn was factual until Tyler returned after she got out of the hospital. He had taken her down to the old Lockwood cellar, locked her outside, chained himself up, then transformed. It had been a horrible thing to witness, and she'd had taken everything in her to leave him there as she promised she would. The next morning he explained as much as he could about the situation, and how that was the real reason that Mason had left. Tyler, however, had needed to leave so that he could learn to control himself when he was trapped in wolf form, as he didn't want to risk hurting anyone else. He'd confided in her that he thought Caroline was a werewolf at one point and then a vampire, and because of that had nearly gotten himself killed. The savageThor brothers had gone to rescue Caroline, and the brothers had scared the hell out of him when the fighting started and bodies started dropping. It wasn't until Damon was shot that Naruto revealed his magic and dropped every single werewolf that was there instantly. Mind blown, she'd gone to visit Liz at home, who proceeded to pour her a drink before filling her in. She had explained to her that Caroline was a kitsune and how that happened. Needless to say, hearing how that sweet girl had been murdered in her hospital bed had reduced her to tears. She'd known Caroline since the girl was in diapers, such news couldn't not affect her. Still, Naruto had, at Caroline's insistence, sealed the vast majority of her power away, and she would live and age like a human until she died, at which point she'd begin her new life in full. Regardless, she had still apologized to Caroline for Tyler's actions and promised her that nothing like that would ever happen again. Then she had talked to Naruto by phone, and they agreed to terms for Tyler to come back home, terms which the part of her that was part of the council had been impressed and found them more than fair. In fact, she had been so impressed that it had given her an idea, something she'd been putting together ever since. A knocking at her door broke her from her thoughts, and turning her attention away from the window, she bid the person to enter, with the door opening to admit Rudy Hopkins, the man who had unknowingly set her on this path. You wanted to see me? Close the door, said Carol before motioning him to take the seat across from her. I'm going to be stepping down at the end of the school year. When Tyler leaves for college, I'm going with him, said the woman, surprising him. I get that. I wanted to leave years ago. Abby wouldn't hear it, said Rudy. I hope you're no longer considering that. I'd like you to replace me. What about Burns? If the council had any faith in him, they wouldn't have stuck me with the job. Burns is someone new. He'd need to be let in on the town secrets. With you, that's not an issue. Not only do you already know the secrets and more of them than most of the council members, you are in a rather unique position, said Carol before handing him a folder, causing his eyes to narrow as he opened it and saw the headline. Meanwhile, in another part of Mystic Falls, Klaus and Cole stood outside the door as they watched a motorcycle pulling up the driveway of the Mikkelsen mansion. The bike itself was a red Harley-Davidson Softail Deluxe which pulled to a stop just before the front door. The rider was clearly a woman judging by their shaping, and after she stepped off the bike and removed her helmet she was revealed to be quite the beautiful woman, if younger than they expected. She had light olive skin, hazel green eyes, and dark brown shoulder length and worn loose. She was fairly tall for a woman, around 5'7" or 5'8", with an athletic yet slim figure. She was wearing a pair of black jeans with a purple top and a black leather jacket. "I'm looking for Klaus Mikkelsen. I was told I could find him here," said the woman. "Well, that rules me out. Later, Nick," said Cole, nodding to her as he stepped away from them and went to his car. "Excuse my brother, he's a bit of a wild child. Anyhow, I am Klaus Mikkelsen. How can I help you?" said the hybrid. "Actually, you were the one put the word out you wanted meet me." "My name is Haley Marshall," said the woman. "I did indeed send that word out. However, you'll need to prove that. You aren't the first claiming to be her," said Klaus. Frowning at that, the woman lowered her jacket, revealing she was wearing a tank top, and turned so that he could see her right shoulder, revealing her birthmark in the shape of a crescent moon. "So you're her. Come on in," said Klaus, opening the door while Haley fixed her jacket so that it was all the way on before stepping inside. "So why did you want to see me?" questioned the young woman lightly. "Because of your mother, actually. She asked me find you," revealed Klaus. "I doubt that. My parents made it clear they wanted nothing to do with me when they kicked me out," said Haley. "I meant your birth mother," said Klaus, causing her eyes to widen before they narrowed. "Impossible. My birth parents are dead, unless they didn't stay that way," said Haley. "They are not vampires. However, your mother was more special than anyone knew, like my birth father. Let's just say for now this world holds secrets that not even we knew it possessed." As he said this, he stopped in front of a large wooden door. "This door leads into our basement. Inside the basement is another door which acts as a portal. A friend of mine installed it so that I could travel there and back. I'll warn you now, everything you think you know about being a wolf, forget it." With that, Klaus opened the door and led the way inside. When they made it into the basement, which was actually quite large, he led her to yet another door, and her eyes widened as he opened in to reveal nothing but swirling orange light. He offered her a hand, which she accepted before she even knew what she was doing, and in the next second they were stepping through the door. As the door swung shut behind them, neither realized the significance of the event or how they had just massively changed their futures. Elena was silent as they boarded the plane to head back to Virginia. Granted, she had been silent for most of the morning anyway. They had met up with Jeremy easy enough and had spent the previous day watching Jeremy practice and having out in the city with his friends. Seeing as how their flight wasn't until this morning, however, Elena had allowed Jeremy to stay one more night with his friend while they'd stayed in their hotel. Elena had wanted to just stay in a motel, but Naruto had vetoed that and booked their stay at the rally in one of their suites. She would admit she'd had quite a bit of fun the previous nights. They'd played a few games of cards, she had her first taste of patron mixed with lemonade, and he'd even talked her into smoking weed with him. The last bit she enjoyed more than she would admit, as it had helped her really relax. She had insisted they share the bed, just like she insisted on only having a single bed. At the time, it had been more about her not wanting him to spend so much money on the trip. When they woke this morning, things had been normal. They'd talked a bit and joked around, and before she knew what was happening, she had kissed him. Then she had kissed him again, and they were making out on the bed and would have probably had sex if Jeremy wouldn't have called when he did. She knew she should be feeling worse about doing so than she did, but both Caroline and Bonnie had teased her about it before they left. Bonnie had even teased her about there being a spot in Naruto's harem for her, though now she didn't know if she'd just been teasing. Either way, now she really needed to talk to Bonnie and figure out what the hell she was going to do. "Okay, what's up with Elena?" questioned Jeremy. "We made out," said Naruto, shrugging. "Dude, seriously, she's my sister. Technically your cousins," corrected Naruto. "Semantics. Blood or adopted, she's still my sister. Plus I'm still dating your daughter," said Jeremy. Could be worse, said Naruto. How? Questioned Jeremy, frowning. It could have been Damon. Don't even joke like that. You don't have to worry about it. Alina's a big girl and can take care of herself, said Naruto. Sure, when she's not acting stupid. There's a reason we had to lock her in the house, remember? Said Jeremy, causing him to chuckle. Jeremy in return shook his head. Honestly, he'd rather it be Naruto. He couldn't think of a worse person for Elena to be with than Damon. After all, Damon did kill him before, as much as they all tried to act like it didn't happen. As such, if she wanted to join Naruto's harem now, then more power to her. He, however, was going to mind his own business and act like he knew nothing about any of it. Chapter 19. Haley hadn't known what to expect following Klaus into the portal, but the place they entered into had not been it. Initially, they arrived in the middle of a dense forest, and her senses, enhanced as they were, had been immediately filled with that natural fragrances found in nature. From there he led her for what she guessed was 3 or 4 miles until they emerged on a hill overlooking a town, and further beyond it to a large stone castle. As they walked towards it, he explained that the town was called Wintertown and the castle beyond it was Winterfell, the home of the original pack. That knowledge had shocked her, as even she had heard the legends of the original pack, but they had long since been considered just that, like King Arthur. Klaus had gone on to explain that the legends were true, and all werewolves born of the 7 packs were the descendants of the original pack. Furthermore, everyone who called Wintertown home was a wolf and thus a descendant of the pack. To her surprise, he led her through Wintertown and up to the ancient castle itself, though they exchanged greeting to several people along the way. The gates of the castle were open and unguarded, and they simply made their way inside, where they came across many people making their way around. They were greeted by a man, Aaron, who after guided them further into the castle into what she'd learned was called the Great Keep. Once inside the building, he led them until they came to a door, knocked, and then stepped inside when allowed to enter. He'd stepped back out a few moments later and opened the door wide, allowing them in. Inside they found that the room they entered was an office with only a single woman occupying it. She looked to be in her late 20s with a slim figure and long red hair with blue eyes. As they entered, the woman was standing, allowing Haley to see she was of a similar height to herself and was dressed casually in a simple blue shirt and a pair of dark blue jeans, which would have stood out more if her desk wasn't also supporting a pair of computer monitors. Haley, however, barely had time to take this in before the woman gasped and looked at her with watery eyes. Klaus had soon introduced the woman as Sansa Stark, her mother. Things after that had moved in something of a blur, but she was pleased to learn that most of her worst fears regarding her birth family had been unfounded. As it turns out, Sansa, like the rest of her family, was immortal. She'd been human once but had been blessed with immortality after her death. She had, however, explained that she, like many of those who were spiritually immortal, had the ability to place her spirit in a human body, which many of them tended to do. She had done just that rather recently, and that was how she came to be her mother, Miriam Henry, part of the Crescent Wolf Pack of New Orleans. She had married Marcus Labonaire, who would become the head of one of the 2 families that ran that pack, and together they had produced Haley, or rather Andrea Labonaire. Unfortunately, that had been a time of tension amongst the clan, who at the same time had been feuding with vampires over control of New Orleans. Her parents had agreed to a betrothal between herself and the heir of the Kenner family, the other ruling family of the Crescents, when they came of age. Unfortunately, both Miriam and Marcus had been murdered by Richard Xavier Dumas, a former alpha of the clan, in their home, and Haley had been luckily spirited away by the leader of the vampires, Marcel Gerard, who'd gotten her out of New Orleans. Back in her natural form, Sansa was unable to return to the mortal realm for the length of a human lifetime. Upon learning all of this, Haley had been both happy she hadn't been abandoned and highly upset due to the tragedy that had befallen them. That, however, had been what seemed like years ago, though. In that time she had gotten to know her mother and her siblings rather well, including Robb Stark, the Wolf King, and Klaus's father, in the same way Sansa was her mother. She had learned a lot in that time, things about herself and about being a wolf, many of which had been knowledge that was lost. Amongst the many things she was taught was how to fight, ride a horse, sew, cook, hunt, and even magic. One bit of lost knowledge she'd learned was that the wolves had once been a powerful group of witches, only they'd been cursed, their magic locked away, and the wolf forms they were so proud of had instead become something to fear. While they were unable to break the curse, they'd worked around it, and after a long time of trying, she'd finally been able to access her magic. Unfortunately, there were limits to what she could do. Things like elemental magic was beyond her, but there were other magics she did have access to. She had also gotten to know Klaus rather well in that time as well, and would admit they'd become rather good friends. They were lucky in that time in this realm worked differently than time in the mortal realm, which was the reason that she hadn't aged despite how long they had been there. It helped that they'd been learning a good bit about magic together. Klaus had a good bit more access than she did, but even he had limits thanks to the werewolf curse. At the moment, she could be found sitting within what they called the God's Wood, resting her back against the great weirwood tree. Her mother had come to her earlier with a proposal, and she'd stretched her magic to her limit in order to see if it was viable. Since then, however, she had retreated here as the calming influence allowed her to think undisturbed for the most part. "Hello, little wolf." She smiled softly at the nickname, the one that only Klaus called her. He settled beside her and offered her a cardboard container which she didn't even need to open to know it had a cinnamon roll within it. "Klaus, I want to show you something, but I need you to promise me you won't do anything rash," said Haley. "You realize, of course, saying such things does not help your cause," said Klaus. "I'm serious, Klaus. My mom showed me something. I'm going to share the memories with you," said the werewolf. "I'm guessing this is why you have retreated to this place," said Klaus. "It is. I needed time to think. Now I need us to be on the same page. I need you to control yourself because this requires physical contact. Which means you would be hurt if I were to lash out," said Klaus in realization. His moment of realization turned into surprise when she moved and placed herself in his lap in a straddling position. Lifting her hands, she placed her index and middle fingers on each side of his head on the temples. "Priori memoria," said the girl softly before her fingers began glowing with a soft white energy. What they would see would change how they lived their lives going forward, as what she showed was a vision of the future, what would have happened had they not met when they had. While for them only a short time would pass, they would bear witness to nearly 16 years worth of time. In Mystic Falls, things had continued to move forward. It had only been a month since they'd gone to retrieve Jeremy from Denver, and though things were still happening, events had thankfully slowed. Esther had vanished, much to Naruto's annoyance. When his clones had gone to retrieve Alaric, the witch had already jumped from the body she had been using, leaving a rather confused young lady behind. Alaric had at least been fine, as the clones had gotten to him before she could start her ritual, which was a plus. While the Michelsons hadn't been happy with the news regarding their mother, Naruto hadn't really been affected by it. Aside from that, Naruto had honestly not done much outside of a regular high schooler's expectation. He had of course talked to Bonnie about the makeout session he'd had with Elena, and knew that she had in turn talked to Elena. Nothing else, however, had happened since then, as Bonnie had made it clear to Elena that being with him meant being with every other woman in the relationship, including her, Lexi, and Catherine. Elena had asked for some time to think, and they'd consented to giving her just that. Much to the joy of the locals, Matt led the Timberwolves to their first state championship in the school's history and even shattered the state record for passing yards. Matt finished the game with 825 passing yards, wards with 13 touchdowns, and threw a nearly perfect game of 33 for 36 with only 2 passes dropped, 1 miss and no interceptions thrown. Tyler also had a hell of a game, with 4 of his catches being touchdowns. Needless to say, both of them were being celebrated for the win. With his grades up and his performance on the field for the last season, Matt had gotten several scholarship offers from both D1 and D2 colleges. Unlike the girls who still hadn't made up their minds, he'd cheated, with Matt taking Orbing him to both of his top choices, Florida and Los Angeles, on the same day. Florida, however, just so happened to be in the midst of a hurricane when they got there, while the weather in Los Angeles was much nicer. Los Angeles won due to better weather. Unfortunately, he'd hit a wall on locating Lily, as while he knew she was in a prison world, locating a Gemini was proving to be rather difficult. Of course, at this point, after speaking with Ketsia, he was also of the mind that he should wait until the business with Silas was handled before bringing Lily out. At that point, he would be able to offer them the cure for immortality, allowing them to return to their original human lives. If they rejected that, he'd have the serums as well to combine the vampire bloodlines, which would give all of them a choice. At the moment, however, he didn't care about any of that. Instead, his focus was currently centered elsewhere, as it was family time. Specifically, it was birthday time for 3 of his kids. At the moment, Naruto could be found lying on his bed in the boarding house with Hinata in his arms and Katarina in hers, who, despite not physically showing yet, they all knew was pregnant. He and Hinata had decided to hold the birthday gathering for the entire family, however, since so many were also currently mortal, they had to hold it in the human world, and the boarding house was chosen since it was out of the way. Due to the number of people in attendance, however, he'd needed to open the expanded wing of the house since they'd had no need for it in the last few decades. The expanded wing had been there since the beginning, but after seeing no use for it, Naruto had closed it and sealed it away magically. Revealing it had been easily done, and seeing the looks on Damon's and Stefan's faces at the sight of it had been quite amusing. Still, they had definitely needed the room with the vast majority of his children present, and all of Naruto's women. He'd even put doubles in place for Nikita and Alex. Buffy, Willow and Faith were here, as were Buffy's sister Dawn, Cordy and their husband Xander. Vicky was in town, though she'd elected to stay at the Donovan house with Matt, and even Nadia, his and Katarina's daughter, had come. His parents were also here in their mortal forms of Karen Rowe and his dad's new mortal form Andy Hargrove, though both could change into their true forms now if they felt the need. Of course, with his mom came his newest and youngest sibling Lily, while Nathan, Haley and Jamie had come, as had Lucas with his girlfriends Peyton Sawyer and Brooke Davis, so the expanded space was definitely being put to use. Climbing out of the bed, he gave both sleeping women a kiss on the head before stepping into his bathroom. 30 minutes later, he was fully dressed in a pair of sweats, a t-shirt and slip-on sandals. As he made his way from the room checking on the younger kids, he was not surprised to find that most of them were up in their pajamas and watching cartoons together on the floor. Taking a seat on the couch behind them, he was soon joined on the couch by Boruto. The duo were found there nearly 2 hours later, though both had been joined on the couch by the younger kids, Yuzu on Naruto's lap and Boruto's son Kesumu, who clearly got his looks from his father with his blonde hair and blue eyes. Of course, all of the kids in the room were Uzumaki's, which was proven as they seemed to vanish as soon as they heard the word food. Following the kids into the larger room with the tree, he took a seat on yet another couch with Hinata sliding into her place at his side. Laughter abounded as minor pranks were pulled, and the adults were sucked into the joy exuded by the kids. Soon enough, more people started arriving, first Vicky and Matt, Bonnie, Caroline and Liz, with Elena, Jeremy and Alaric arriving last. Elsewhere, Esther Mikhailson was still hard at work. The presence of the Ninth Lord meant that she had to take her time and get things right, as it would definitely be to her disadvantage to rush. With the extra time she'd taken, it allowed her to salvage some of her original plans. However, before even that, she'd needed a proper body. Leaving the quaint little town of Mystic Falls behind had been easy enough, and it had taken her practically no time to locate the perfect body for her spirit. Niklas was sentimental, and as such her true body had been perfectly preserved inside its coffin, which had been spelled shut. Even retrieving her body had been simple, as Niklas had kept the coffin close to him in Mystic Falls in the trailer of a semi-truck. Magically compelling a pair of mortals, she had them breaking into the trailer and retrieving the coffin that held her body. Once it was in her possession and the duo were no longer of use, she'd sent them off, having them drive their car off of a bridge. Studying the coffin, she recognized her old friend and mentor Ayana's spell work easily, and while incredibly powerful, she was able to unseal the coffin in very little time. Transferring her spirit from her borrowed body into her true one had been easier than she expected, and she'd luxuriated in the freedom of being in her own body and not being forced to share. As a plus, she was much more powerful than she'd been in the borrowed bodies, as the two girls had nowhere near the potential power that she herself had possessed. Now truly alive once more, she had set about putting things in place. While she wouldn't make any overt moves in Mystic Falls, she honestly had no need to at the moment. The first thing she did was create a pair of containment circles, one of which she linked to Alaric's spirit, which would appear there the next time he died instead of appearing on the other side as he had previously. The second one had needed to be much more powerful, as it needed to be able to contain a demon and not allow it to escape. She had thought only briefly about reviving Michael but disregarded the idea swiftly, as she honestly didn't need the collateral damage he would cause in his wake. At the moment she was resting something her body still required, or at least she was until there was a shift and her eyes opened. Rather than lying on her bed, she was now in a room occupied solely by a long table with several seats. Though she had been dead for a while as a witch on the other side, she recognized the chambre de chasse for what it was and took a seat in the place marked for her. Not long Elijah, Rebecca, Cole, Finn and Klaus all appeared, with the latter shooting her an angered look and taking his seat without a word. She was surprised, however, that there was still one seat remaining, at least until one more figure appeared, this one a woman who was slender with long dirty blonde hair and green eyes. She looked around in surprise for several long moments before moving over to take a seat. "Now that we are all here, let us begin, shall we?" said Elijah. "What is this, Elijah?" questioned Esther. "Surely you didn't think you could show up and we would not learn about it? Despite your crimes against us, I thought it would be a good idea for us to speak, perhaps stop you before you made any more mistakes," said Elijah. "And what crimes have I committed against you?" questioned Esther. "Let us start with the very first. I'm sure you remember Freya," said Klaus, motioning to the girl who she hadn't recognized, causing her eyes to widen. "You know who I am?" questioned the girl, shocked. "Indeed, sister, though it is a very recent development for most of us," said Cole. "We will of course be freeing you soon now that we know where you are," said Rebecca. "How is this possible? It's been over 1,000 years," said Esther. "Dahlia created a spell. It makes me functionally immortal, but I only get to live 1 year at a time and have to sleep for the next 100. Her goal, however, is true immortality with no need to jump between centuries," said Freya. "As if it wasn't enough, the bitch had been leeching off of our sister's magic since she was 5 years old," said Cole in disgust. "I had no idea," said Esther, stunned. "Quit acting like you care. You sold me into slavery at 5, it's obvious you don't," said Freya. "Moving on, what happened with Freya is just the first crime against us. Second, you tricked Niklas into wearing a cursed necklace, one that bound his strength and his anger. In effect, you kept him from gaining the strength he should have, allowing Michael to further torment him, and made it so that he had no idea how to control his anger," said Elijah. "I did that to protect him," said Esther before being cut off. "You did it to protect yourself, to hide the truth of your infidelity. Rather than be upfront about it, you hid the truth, leaving me to take Michael's abuse in your stead," said Klaus. "Then there was Hendrik," said Rebecca. "You cannot blame that on me," exclaimed Esther. "Why not? You knew Nick would be drawn to the werewolves and wouldn't be hurt by them, even untriggered as he was. Had anyone else known the truth, Hendrik would not have been there. Nick certainly wouldn't have allowed it," said Rebecca. "Instead of saying anything, however, you kept it to yourself and then allowed Niklas to take the blame for Hendrik's death. As such, it seems to me like yet another crime," said Elijah. "Then there was your final and worse sin. You murdered us, your children, those who remained. You allowed Michael to murder us. Worse still, you turned us into monsters," said Finn. "That one I cannot defend against. But it is also why I returned to correct this mistake," said Esther. "You aimed to kill us. Michael failed and now you've come to try your hand at it," said Cole. "Michael aimed to kill Niklas. The rest of you he chased because you stayed with him. However, as Finn stated, this is still my fault, my failing. In trying to make you strong enough to survive the werewolves, I turned my children into monsters. This is a mistake that I must rectify," said Esther before she surprised all of them by vanishing. "How'd she leave?" demanded Rebecca. "Our mother is arrogant, but for good reason. She was studying the structure of the spell the entire time. I never designed this one to hold anyone here against their will. Once she realized that, she knew she was free to leave as soon as she chose," said Finn. "Still, our discussion was fruitful. We know the vision Niklas was shown was truthful now," said Elijah. Some changes have already been made to that future though, said Klaus. True, but we have a guideline to work from in the short term at least, said Cole. First thing we need to do is get Freya out of that prison, said Finn. I'll handle that. I can call in a favor or two, said Klaus. Even if you get me out, I won't wake for another few years, said Freya. We also need a plan for Dahlia. Her dying goes without saying, but we need to figure out how to do it and quickly, said Finn. Preferably one with little chance of us dying as well, said Cole. We have time, so we can table that for now, said Elijah. Silas is still a problem. We've already promised to help with that, said Rebecca. The problem is getting to him. We know where he is, just not the path to get there, said Elijah. In the vision we know they used Cole's death to complete the hunter's map. I'd like to avoid that this time, said Klaus. I second that, said Cole. Then we will use mine, said Finn, shocking all of them. Are you crazy? Exclaimed Rebecca. Not at all. We know that none of us can permanently be killed, not now that we've taken the serum. While our bodies will be destroyed, they will rebuild themselves in the spirit world and we'll just be unable to return to this world for a few years. I had already planned on leaving for the new world with Marcus, Michael, and Celine, so I was leaving anyway, said Finn. What do you mean new world? Also, what serum are you talking about? Questioned Freya. There is a lot to catch you up on, sister. Let's do this the fast way, shall we? Said Cole before holding his hand out, palm up, which then began glowing. And now you're doing magic. Yet another thing I need to understand, said Freya before sighing. Placing her hand atop his before her eyes closed and her body began glowing with the golden light coming from his hand. This lasted for only a few minutes before her eyes opened and she removed her hand. Immediately she had a small headache, a consequence in passing knowledge in such a way, and she was actually thankful she hadn't tried that in her physical body instead of just this mental form. You lot have certainly been busy this last year. I'd like to meet this Naruto sometime, said Freya after a few moments before focusing on Klaus. You've grown. The last time I saw you all, it was when you daggered Cole. Now I see that it was perhaps for the best, said Freya. We are out of time, said Finn, surprising all of them. It is good to see you again, sister, said Finn, moving over to kiss her forehead. I'll be gone before you wake, but I'll leave something for you, said Finn. Take care of yourself, Finn, said Freya, getting a nod just before he vanished. Be careful, all of you, said Freya, looking around the room, taking in the sight of her siblings before she vanished. The remaining Michelsons did not stick around as they were all together in the real world. They all simply vanished, leaving the place empty just before the spell holding it together failed and it too vanished. Several days later, and the Uzumaki family had once more scattered, with many returning home and those living mortal lives returning to them. For the group that called Mystic Falls home, that meant a return to classes, though for Bonnie it was slightly different, as while she was still going to classes she found herself in the studio nearly every day. The only days she wasn't in the studio were days she was working with Willow, which had become less due to how much she'd learned and how they'd done it. Because of this, she was sitting in sessions and learning quite a bit more about music than she expected. Her family had been stunned with the recording contract she'd been offered, and she'd almost not signed it based solely on her commitments to the family, at least until her mother told her to, and that she would take on the role of matriarch. To be honest, she hadn't initially thought it would work out that way, but somehow Abby had gotten accepted by the rest of the family and even the spirits, though just barely. That left Bonnie free to pursue her own desires and chase the dream. While she was doing that, however, it consequently kept her busy, and to be perfectly honest, she was happy about that. With her mom back in town, the studio had become her refuge, as she really wasn't ready to deal with her regularly at this point. That isn't to say she didn't still spend time with her friends, because she did. More often than not, Caroline and Elena were with her in the studio. That's where they were when Naruto entered the room with a big smile on his face. Many noticed his appearance, especially as he came and swept Bonnie up and gave her a big kiss that left her breathless. Damn bro, what's got you in such a good mood? The person who asked was Chris Brown, who had let the girls sit in while he worked on his upcoming album. A number of things, all of which I've been working on for a while and most of them have been finalized. Jive finally gave up graffiti for one. Said Naruto, causing the singer's eyes to widen. After his rather public domestic situation came out in 2009, his record company Jive had dropped him. He would have spiraled if Naruto hadn't have been there to help, and he'd spent the time seeing a therapist and staying out of the public eye. He'd dropped 3 mixtapes in that time, and his most recent outing was the BET Awards in July. His third album Graffiti, however, had never dropped, and he'd taken it as a loss until this point. We'll work on it a bit and drop Graffiti in January, then we'll drop FAME later in the year. Said Naruto, much to his shock. Now, taking a step back, last year I spoke in a few ears and was able to block Disney's acquisition of Marvel. Then I worked out a deal with Marvel that would enable me to own the company within a year. Said Naruto, surprising them. At the same time, I made similar deals for the Marvel characters owned by Fox and Sony. Those deals all went through about a few days ago. Continued the blonde. Then I talked to George Lucas, who has been talking about retiring. I worked out a deal where ownership of Lucasfilm is now a joint split between us, but I'd be in control. I've just got off the phone with Brian Roberts, the CEO of Comcast. Now Comcast is in the process of buying NBC Universal pending FCC approval. When it goes through, and it will, in exchange for bringing those properties over in exclusivity, I'll get 30% ownership of Comcast, and Kyoko will become the new president of Universal Pictures. Said Naruto. Kyoko was one of Naruto's many daughters, this one whom he shared with a kitsune named Marjorie, whom they'd met not long ago. Marjorie was one of Naruto's older wives, not nearly as old as Hinata, but one who was over 2,000 years old. Why only 30%? Questioned Caroline. Because neither Comcast nor Universal are taking ownership of any of the properties I'm bringing. They get exclusivity, which means ownership of those properties will stay within the family. Plus, Boruto already owns 15%, so it's more line 45. Said Naruto. How'd you get him to go for that? Questioned Chris. We placed a bet. He lost. If he'd have won, they'd have gotten ownership. Now, if things aren't handled a certain way, I can take those properties and walk away in 30 years. Said Naruto. So why go through all of that? Questioned Elena. That a story, but let's just say Stan and Jack were friends of mine back in the day. I saw a vision of the future where Disney owned Lucasfilm and Marvel, and while it started fine, it grew to be a horrible situation. This is my way, stop that from happening. Said Naruto, shuddering a bit. Anyway, another thing Peyton called. Miley has a guest spot on Hannah Montana for Yubani. With the supernatural elements calling Mystic Falls home, things could not remain calm for long. At this same time elsewhere, Alaric woke to find himself in a cave, where all around him were all manner of strange things. On one side of the room there was what appeared to be little more than a moving wisp of darkness, while the other side was covered with a host of things, including what looked like a pile of weapons. Hello again, Alaric, came a voice, catching his attention. Turning towards it, he was greeted to a woman, pale-skinned, perhaps in her late 40s, with long blonde hair, who wore all black dress that gave her an almost aristocratic appearance. Do I know you? Questioned Alaric warily. Indeed. My name is Esther Mikaelson. What you see now is my true appearance. Said Esther. So why am I here, and how did I get here? Questioned Alaric. You died. Normally that ring sends your spirit to the other side for a time before it allows you back into your body. I've taken the liberty of redirecting where you appear for the time being. Look, I appreciate the offer, but I really don't want to get mixed into the Mikaelson family drama. Said Alaric. It's fortunate then that you'll be the one to end it. I'll be linking their lives so that if you kill one of them, all of them die. Said Esther, stunning him. I didn't think any mother could actually enable the death of their own children. Said Alaric. My children are already dead. In their place are monsters. Do not let their facade fool you. With this action I release their souls from torment. Now I'm sorry, but I must concentrate. Also, this may hurt a lot. With that, Esther waved her hand, and suddenly no sound escaped from Alaric's position. Even with him still speaking, he heard not a single sound escape from himself. Esther meanwhile began a slow chant and a language that Alaric had never heard before. Her voice slowly picked up speed and power, and Alaric suddenly stiffened before he let out a silent scream. Alina's screams were sudden and terrifying. They'd been in the studio still getting the first listens of Chris Brown's graffiti album when she suddenly stiffened and began screaming. The thing about Virginia, however, was it was home to a lot of witch families. Chris Brown, while not as powerful or well-trained as Bonnie, was still a well-taught witch in his own right, and while Bonnie spit out a spell to immobilize Elena just as she began to thrash about, Chris had spit out one to silence her screams. "What the hell's going on?" demanded Caroline. "Whatever it is, there's powerful magic tied into it," said Chris. Before they could comment more, the door was thrown open as Naruto rushed in, followed quickly by Missy, Timbaland and Peyton. They had all been talking when Naruto had rushed out of the room and the rest had hurriedly followed after him. "What happened?" demanded Peyton, seeing Alina's state. "We don't know, she just suddenly started screaming," said Chris while Bonnie and Caroline were busy tending to Elena. Frowning, Naruto approached her and eyes narrowed. He searched her with his senses before his eyes widened and he cursed. Then he spoke a single word. The room was washed in power for only a few moments before the screaming abruptly stopped and she slumped over unconscious. "A barrier spell?" questioned Missy in surprise. Alina's heritage finally kicked in. "It's not fully there, but enough where she was able to subconsciously create mental link between her and a someone else. Those are double-edged swords though," said Naruto. "Which means she was feeling someone else's pain," said Bonnie in understanding. "Alarix. Esther's making a movie and Elena was caught in the backlash. Take her to the boarding house and activate the barrier," said Naruto, causing Bonnie to immediately withdraw her sling ring and create a portal, much to the surprise of those who'd never seen it. Without a word, Caroline lifted Elena, giving away her strength. Not that the thought even crossed her mind as she and Bonnie rushed through the portal, with it closing soon after. "I think you guys should get out of town for a bit. With the entire Mikhailson family around, there's no telling what kind of chaos will be unleashed," said Naruto. "You sure? I mean, those guys are supposed to be hardcore," said Missy. "They are, but I'm worse. Unlike you guys, I'm not a witch. I'm one of the 9 lords, specifically the 9th. Peyton, I'll drop you with Brooke until things calm down." "Wait, you mean like the lords of nature, those 9 lords?" questioned Chris in surprise. "Yes, along with any other title we go by. I only tell you this because you're my friends and I don't want you worrying. I'll call when it's over and things settle," said Naruto, placing his hand on Peyton's shoulder before they both vanished in a swirl of golden orbs. When Naruto appeared in the savageThor house, it was to find its residents sitting around Elena, who was still unconscious. Also present was Jeremy, who Bonnie had brought over by way of portal just after she arrived. "So Bonnie said that Elena's heritage kicked in. What's that mean?" said Jeremy nervously. "Elena is a doppelganger, one in a long line of them. The term means shadow selves or mortal shadows, and it is about more than just a physical appearance. Doppelgangers are exact copies of their progenitors, in Elena's case that being the witch Amara, handmaiden to Ketsia. They are nature's way of balancing out the existence of the true immortals Silas and Amara with versions of them that live and die. Because of this, they are everything that the people they are based on are. As such, the potential for powerful magic is there, hence why doppelganger blood is so powerful," explained Naruto. "So what does that mean for Elena?" questioned Matt. "Amara, despite being a handmaiden, a very powerful witch. While not as powerful as Ketsia or Silas, she was considered a powerful psychic capable of both telepathy and telekinesis. Truthfully, all witches should be capable of such things, but for Amara, telepathy came easily. At some point, Elena subconsciously created a psychic link between herself and Alaric, which is what caused what happened today. I've severed the connection, but now she'll need to be trained since her magic is awake," said Naruto, looking pointedly at Bonnie. "No way. I haven't been training long enough to teach anyone anything," said Bonnie quickly. "Actually, you have. You've spent more time in the chamber with Willow than I have with Caroline or Matt. You've graduated from student to apprentice a while ago. The next step on the road to mastery is to teach your own students," said Naruto, causing her eyes to widen. Any further discussion was interrupted by a groan as Elena slowly sat up, only to immediately hold her head. What happened? Questioned the girl softly. Short answer, you got less boring, said Damon, smirking. Chapter 20. As an immortal, Naruto spent his time when not in the spirit world traveling the multiverse. Because of this, he liked to be kept informed of the happenings on the many versions of Earth, and thanks to his clones scattered about, he didn't technically have to be physically present anywhere, and it gave him a valuable source of information. He knew that most of his fellow gods were all the same way, and in truth the only one that spent less time traveling than him was Hinata, as his wife both preferred being around the family and required for too much preparation to just go places whenever she desired. He knew on this version of Earth alone, aside from Yugito and Gaara, there were several other less powerful people on this version of Earth. As such, when he received a mental call from Jiraiya in the early morning hours, he was not surprised to be hearing from his godfather. After being resurrected as an immortal, thanks in no small part to his favorite godson, Jiraiya had become not just a kitsune but a god of love, much to the surprise of many. He and Tsunade married not long later and had been together ever since. To spice things up and keep things fresh, they had made a habit of being reborn in mortal worlds and trying to find each other again every few centuries. More often than not it worked, and their memories unlocked after they first copulated. This was unfortunately not one of those times, as he hadn't met Tsunade yet, and now there was a wrinkle. This time he was living the life of Edward Valmont and was currently on wife number 3, who'd just tried to kill him and nearly succeeded, causing Jiraiya's failsafe to activate, restoring his memory and a small portion of his power, allowing him to heal. Jiraiya had asked him to take care of the wrinkle while he recovered, as he was apparently the one best positioned to do so. Checking in with his clones, he soon discovered why, as there was already a clone in place, this one living a mortal life, allowing him an easy in. Going to the clone in question, he found he was asleep, which was a bonus, and placing a hand on his chest for a few moments before the body vanished, being absorbed into his own. It took only a few minutes for him to sync up fully with the memories he was inheriting before he transformed, taking the form of the body he'd just absorbed. His current form went by the name of Jason Valmont, the son of Arthur Valmont and brother of Edward. The Valmonts were a wealth family that were part of New York's upper class and had been for quite some time. Edward, Jiraiya's current form, was independently wealthy thanks to his various business pursuits, though he'd started in real estate. Jason himself was a young man in his mid-20s with short-cut brown hair and green eyes, who stood at just over 6 feet in height. A few hours later he could be found walking down the streets of the Upper East Side of Manhattan, New York. As he reached his destination, the door opened as the doorman immediately recognized him. Nodding a greeting, he made his way inside and stopped on of the house staff to learn the whereabouts of his quarry before slipping her 100 and continuing on his way. As he did so, he came across the rather curious sight of a young man moving quickly down the hall in just his underwear and shook his head in amusement. Reaching the door, he paused as his hearing picked up a conversation happening within the room despite the low tone. "I assume you've come to make arrangements." It was a girl's voice, low with just a bit of seduction in the tone. "Some other time," came a boy's voice, followed by shuffling and footsteps. "Excuse me." It was the girl, disbelief in her tone. "I'm not in the mood. I want to fuck. And I don't." "Good afternoon, Catherine," said the boy before there was the sound of more steps. Silently he raised his opinion on the boy before opening the door, revealing a pair of teens inside, both of whom were surprised at his entrance. Standing just before the door was the boy. He had short curly brown hair and blue eyes which were currently wide in shock. The girl caught his attention as she looked like a young Buffy, though she had long dark brown hair. She was on the bed in a pink night and had frozen at his entrance, a glass in hand that she clearly intended on throwing. "Jason, this is a surprise," said the boy, who was quick to recover though clearly confused. "Sebastian, Catherine, glad I caught you both together. I have news," said Naruto before focusing his gaze on Catherine, who flushed and dropped the glass. "Get dressed and meet us in the library." With that he turned and exited the room, with the boy Sebastian following quickly, though he at least closed the door to the room behind him. Catherine didn't take long and had obviously rushed to catch them and do damage control, though at least tried to look like she hadn't rushed to meet them. The two teens, Sebastian Valmont and Catherine Mertoy, were certainly a pair and had been since they met after their parents married 3 years ago. The sexual tension between them was thick as hell, and thanks to Jason's memories he knew they weren't actually fucking, yet. Instead they seemed to amuse themselves by competing against each other over who could fuck over the most people, a pair of bored rich kids playing amateur hour Game of Thrones. At least they would make decent Slytherins, third years at best right now, but with time to work he knew Jiraiya would get them up to par. When Catherine entered the library she wore a black skirt and a green blouse, most likely the outfit she had been wearing earlier before Sebastian busted up her little escapade with the streaker. He and Sebastian were of course already sitting inside when she entered, and at a motion she took a seat on the couch beside Sebastian. "I'm proud of you, Sebastian. Your father thought you were already fucking her. Glad to see you still have some control." It was the first time he had broken the silence since he and Sebastian had left Catherine's room. Jason, we're not. Drop the Marcia Brady act, Catherine. We have bigger issues than your infatuation with each other. What's going on? Questioned Sebastian while Catherine sat in shock. Your father is currently in the hospital. Tiffany tried to kill him. She's currently enjoying the hospitality of the Italian authorities. She what? Catherine's exclamation cut through the room. It was full of shock, rage, and not a little bit of fear. Sebastian's face, however, had gone from bored and curious to on of barely held seething rage. He knew that as attracted as he was to Catherine, he held an equal amount of disdain for her mother, if not more. While he survived the attempt, there were consequences, the type of which will change both of your lives and not in the way you think. He paused here, eyeing both of them for a moment before removing a flask from his pocket and tossed it to Sebastian. He didn't even hesitate when he caught it, taking a strong swig before passing it to Catherine, who did the same. There are some truths regarding your father that you need to know. Before that, the matter regarding Catherine needs to be resolved. Her status in the family is tedious, and what she learns depends entirely on what you choose next. At this, Catherine moved to speak, only to be stopped in her tracks at his look. Truthfully, do you love her as more than your stepsister? Sebastian was silent at this while Catherine looked at him, trying to hide her emotions and failing to his more experienced eyes. It also didn't help that he could hear her heart hammering away in her chest. Catherine is a deceitful, evil, beautiful bitch, but she is mine, so yes, I love her. As the words escaped him, Sebastian looked shocked, which Catherine missed as she was a bit busy dealing with her emotions. For her part, she felt her heart fall into her stomach at the start, but by the end had to physically stop herself from jumping into his lap and kissing him hard. Sebastian always told her he loved her, but she'd always known it was part of the game they played. Your turn. Truthfully, same question. At this she froze. She never told Sebastian the full truth, always kept a small space between them, a defensive barrier so it wouldn't hurt when he eventually got bored of the game and consequently of her and moved on like everyone else did. Despite this, everything that she did was to build stock in her eyes, to tease the fact that she was just outside of his reach. Telling the truth always meant the end of their game, which she'd been avoiding to the best of her ability. Of course I do. I've loved the idiot for years. The words escaped her without any conscious input on her part, and her eyes widened, but she did her best to ignore the look she knew Sebastian was sending her. Now that your blinders have been removed and you both have know what I've already known, let's move on. Said Naruto, catching their attention. Catherine, there is a way for you to learn the secrets I'll be telling Sebastian. For that to happen, the two of you will be together forever, there will be no leaving, no divorce. You'll be more than his wife to those in the know. And he couldn't just leave me when he gets bored. She regretted the words as soon as they escaped her lips. Naruto could tell she hated how weak they made her look, vulnerable, probably thinking they'd ruined her image with Sebastian. Seeing her eyes widen in shock when he pulled her into his side made him smirk. With that question answered, let's continue. Bonnie had never really entertained the notion of teaching anyone magic, and while the role of Alina's teacher had been pushed on her, she had folded under the power of Caroline's pout when she wanted to be included as well. As such, she now had two students when she had protested against just one. That was what seemed to have been months ago, at least for them it had been. They were currently in the time chamber, joined by Willow, who was there in a supervisory role, at least officially. Unlike Bonnie and Caroline, this was Elena's first time experiencing the chamber, and aside from magic, the girls spent a lot of their time just hanging out and having fun, something they hadn't done in what seemed like forever. It wasn't just Bonnie teaching either, as Caroline had also been convinced to get in on the action and had begun teaching both girls how to fight. Both Bonnie and Elena had made the mistake of thinking Naruto had only taught her how to use a sword and had been proven extremely wrong. One of the lessons Bonnie had taught the two girls had been occlumency, giving them the ability to protect their minds from invasion and consequently increase their retention rates. This had proved beneficial when Elena taught the girls Romanian and helped them finally get up to the same level with her in terms of their schoolwork. Once she had the knowledge of how to tap into her magic and the basics of telepathy and telekinesis, both Caroline and Bonnie truly understood what Naruto meant when he stated Amara had been gifted. Elena really was a natural when it came to the psychic aspects of being a witch. It wasn't all easy. She spent a lot of time in meditation seeing what she could do, and even Willow had been impressed. Elena nerd that she is had given a reaction that her two best friends should have anticipated but hadn't. "So I am a Jedi." "Not yet. Much to learn, you still have young Padawan," said Willow, as she'd actually been the one with the best reaction to that. Bonnie and Caroline had slid into the game easy enough. Though Caroline had become a big Harry Potter fan, the three girls had still grown up on Star Wars under the watch of Grace and Gilbert. To Elena's mind, it had been crazy that they had gone over so much and hadn't even reached the 2-month mark of their allotted time in the chamber. It helped that everything was structured, and they generally didn't waste time with their schoolwork at this point. They'd done it initially so they could get their homework out of the way, and now that it was, they didn't really need to bother with it. Being in such close proximity, it was only a matter of time until their relationship changed, which had happened when she and Willow walked in on Elena and Caroline making out. "God, you too!" exclaimed Caroline, feeling the tension between Elena and Bonnie. Rolling her eyes, the girl walked up to Bonnie and pulled her into a kiss. It wasn't the first time they'd kissed, but it had been years since their practice kisses, and this one was hard, taking Bonnie by surprise for a moment until she started kissing back on reflex. When they finally broke, Bonnie was slightly out of breath and still surprised, though Caroline wasn't even slightly winded thanks to her kitsune biology. "We're a package deal, Bonnie. You want her, you gotta take me too." Bonnie had responded by pulling the blonde into another kiss. Willow, seeing this, approached Elena, who was looking at the two wide-eyed before gently pulling the girl into a kiss of her own. "We're a package deal too," said Willow, breaking the kiss only momentarily before kissing her again. The three girls had all been surprised when a few days later, while they were still in the honeymoon phase of their newly elevated relationship, Willow had used a scroll and summoned a clone of Naruto. The clone had then taken over certain aspects of their training, separating them into different areas of the chamber. For Bonnie, they focused on elemental magic, something that had been neglected in order because she'd started learning so late. To date, she still only had enough control to not start random fires from the exercises her grandmother had taught her. The things Naruto showed her could be done with the proper training had given her a new goal for her part of her training. For Elena, as she was pretty much a clean slate, she was easy to get started, and he'd given her the same basic training he'd once given to Catherine. When questioned, he informed her that as a doppelganger she would always be a target. The most important thing for her would be how to defend herself and escape. Caroline he'd taken deeper into the chamber, where the gravity was 20 times heavier than normal. He'd told her she would be doing her basic training there until it felt like normal gravity. He'd also told her that she would be the one that would be explaining to her mother and Matt that she joined his harem and her reasons behind it. At that, she actually whimpered, as in her excitement she'd forgotten about both her mother and Matt. New Orleans was one of America's major cities. Founded by the Michelsons in 1718, the city had grown and flourished under their guidance until they were forced to flee in 1919 when Michael appeared. Since that time, another person had stepped up and taken charge of the city, which has since become one of the biggest tourist cities in the country. That person was Marcel Gerard, a vampire that had lived with the Michelsons from his childhood until the day they left the city. Looking at him, one would not realize he was so powerful. Standing at 5 feet 11 inches, he looked like a young man in his mid-20s with his black hair cut into a low fade. He has dark brown skin and brown eyes. He was actually in his home office reading when he was interrupted by his phone ringing. Sighing, he placed the book down and answered. Yeah, what is it? Questioned the vampire. Hello, Marcellus. The voice caused him to freeze. It had been nearly a century since he'd heard it, which caused a mix of emotions to bubble up inside of him. Klaus, I didn't think I'd ever hear from you again, it's been so long, said the vampire after regaining his composure. Indeed it has, and I can express much the same, though for an entirely different reason, said Klaus, and despite the calm of the voice, Marcel could feel himself break into sweat. I did not call you to reminisce on the past though. There is a package I need delivered within the Dowager Falling cottage. There is a glass coffin within which a young woman is slumbering. That woman is my eldest sister Freya. She is under a spelled sleep and is not to be woken but shipped to a location where Elijah and Cole will be waiting to receive her. Handle this discreetly and I'll forgive the fact you tried to have me killed and usurped control of my city. Am I understood? Yeah, I'll take care of it. Good. Another thing, I need you to have that curse on the crescents lifted. I was most displeased to learn they had been incapacitated when I summoned their leaders. Anything else? Yes. Do remember that while you may not share my blood in all the ways that matter, you are my son. Do not ever do something so foolish to endanger the family again. Elijah is a lot less tolerant than I am, said Klaus before the line went dead. Fuck. Esther Mikaelson was exhausted. She had been working almost non-stop since the confrontation with her children. Seeing Freya, her firstborn, alive had lit a fire under her that had forced her to work harder. She'd had to take measures to not only handle her monstrous children but the bitch that had once called herself her sister. She hadn't actually thought about Dahlia in terms of a threat in years. A bonus of turning her children into vampires was that they couldn't have children themselves. Freya was still human, and she intended for her to stay that way, which raised the possibility of her someday having children. Knowing now the lengths Dahlia was prepared to go for power had her altering her plans in order to take her into account. The first thing she'd had to do was link her children together so that if one died they'd all go. That would require more doppelganger blood, which meant she would have to go and see one. Then she had to finish her preparations for Alaric. He needed to exceed the of power as her children immediately in terms of his physicality. The procedure to create her new hunter and imbue him with all of the abilities she wanted to grant had been exhausting for both of them, leaving both of them unconscious from the effort. Unfortunately for Esther, her exhaustion had hit before she'd even started the procedure, and as such a few minor but important things had been missed by her. Unbeknownst to both of them, they were being observed by Ketsia, who had made her own contributions to Esther's project. She knew in the short term neither would be happy with what she had done, but later Alaric would thank her for putting his destiny back on track. Moving over to Esther, she manipulated her memories just a bit so that she would believe that she did all of this herself. Once done with her own work, which while minor in action would be a major change, she retreated back to her own realm. She would need to inform Lord Naruto of her actions as well. Naruto slept for about 3 hours after his return to Mystic Falls. Possessing and then releasing Jason Valmont as he had wasn't anything too complicated, however incorporating the memories, copying them, and returning the originals to Jason had been a touch more complicated. He had only slightly activated Sebastian's heritage, then instructed him on how to mark Catherine as a mate before deactivating it once more, leaving him just enough to heal quicker and take more mates, the latter of which had been Catherine's request. When he woke, it took him a bit to remember that Bonnie, Caroline and Elena were all in New York in the time chamber. Matt was also otherwise occupied as Boruto had him running drills with a strike team. He'd been debating on what to do with the rest of his day when he'd been contacted by Ketsia and informed about what Esther had been up to, the tweaks she had made and why. She had also told him that there was a powerful little witch in New Orleans that was just ripe for the taking, and she'd been slowly manipulating her dreams to get her ready for him. That had actually surprised him until he learned that she was due for a horrible future unless he took her in, and what had caused that. Once done with Ketsia, he'd gotten out of bed, took a shower and made his way over to the Mikaelson house. Pulling up, he raised an eyebrow at the motorcycle parked out front but made his way to the door. Cole opened the door before he could get near and he'd had to pull him back inside before he could leave as he was planning on. Inside he was greeted to the rest of the Michelsons gathered included Elijah and Amelia who he knew had only returned from their honeymoon the previous night. Also in attendance were two women, one a redhead that he recognized as Sage, Damon's vampire mentor. The other surprised him in that he immediately recognized her as a werewolf, which was odd in the company of vampires. They were all sitting around a table and playing what looked to be poker to his eyes. "Ah, mentor, to what do we owe the honor of your visit?" said Klaus upon his entry while Rebecca visibly perked up. Moving over to Rebecca, he took a seat and accepted the drink she poured for him before taking a small bit of it. "Your mother has made a move," said Naruto, causing all of them to scowl in unison. "What has she done now?" questioned Rebecca, clearly agitated. "She's created a new hunter. She's kidnapped Alaric, combined the spells that created the Brotherhood of the Five and the Slayer and bestowed them on him on top of a more powerful version of the spell that made you into vampires. He's pretty much a stronger version of Michael," said Naruto. "I doubt he just went along with that. He told us already he didn't want to be involved," said Finn. "Alaric hadn't hidden the fact that Esther had been summoning his spirit when he died. No, from what my spy uncovered, his original personality has been suppressed in favor of one more to Esther's liking," said Naruto. "Why haven't you put a stop to this already?" questioned Cole. "Simple. Esther is a pawn. Her games and the resulting chaos will draw the attention of a member of the Five who will come to investigate," said Naruto. "This will in turn allow us to complete the hunter's map and lead us to Silas," said Klaus. "I thought you'd like the irony. She also intends to tie your lives together so that if one of you is killed all of you die," said Naruto. "What kind of mother plots the deaths of her own children?" questioned Haley. "Our mother no longer sees us as such. Instead she only sees the monsters she created," said Cole bitterly. The next week seemed to fly by and before anyone knew it Friday had arrived. Alaric hadn't been seen in the entire week, with a substitute already in place for him by Monday. Apparently the school had been made aware that he had a family emergency and would be out of town to deal with it. Naruto had to give Esther some credit for that one, as she had covered her bases well to not raise suspicions, even if she hadn't realized that Elena was mentally tethered to Alaric when she took him. Those who were attending school had been forced to put it out of their minds, though even they realized it was only the calm before the storm. One thing that had happened and had been more amusing for Naruto than anything else was the conversation Caroline had needed to have with her mother. Liz had tried her damnedest to convince her daughter to break things off, but none of her arguments had worked until finally she had revealed the relationship that she'd herself had with Arashi Uzumaki, which had been another of his clones. To Liz's dismay, it hadn't worked, as Caroline had already known about that, then revealed that Bonnie knew about Abby and Elena knew about Miranda, which hadn't stopped either of them. Eventually Liz had given up, and Naruto, recognizing the signs, had hugged her and told her everything would be all right. Matt had taken the news much better than either of them had expected. When Caroline told him, he'd simply told her he was already seeing someone and wished her the best. When he talked to him about it, he found out Matt, aside from thinking it was weird, really didn't care. Though he did point out that the girls in their circle only seemed to date in their circle. When pressed on his new girlfriend, he just told everyone they'd meet her at the dance. The dance in question was a decade dance, this time with the theme of the 1970s. Rebecca had wanted the 20s but hadn't forced it, remembering her purpose for being there and that Naruto had asked her not to cause trouble. Caroline, as the head of the student committee, was in charge of the dance, which meant all of the students in their group had to help with the setup. Rebecca had grumbled, but by this point she and the other girls had become friends and all knew not to take it seriously. The girls had also decided against hiding their relationship, so the biggest gossip was that Naruto, Bonnie, Caroline, Elena, and Rebecca were all dating each other. Mystic Town being the weird place it was, such a relationship wasn't even considered abnormal, just rare. At the moment the girls could all be found at the Gilbert house getting ready. All of them wore a disco-style dress with white knee-high boots, Bonnie in silver, Caroline in gold, Rebecca in pink and Elena in blue. Caroline was clearly excited, which was understandable as she got to do two of her favorite things, play dress up and party. Bonnie was just happy she didn't have to dress like a hippie. She had been adamant from day one that she drew the line at that point. So what's the plan for after the dance? Questioned Elena. After? Questioned Rebecca. It's Caroline, there's always an after. Said Bonnie. You two know me so well. Said the mentioned blonde. So what is it? Questioned Rebecca. I don't think I should say. Care. Said Bonnie. They'll get scared. Said Caroline. Okay, now I'm worried. Said Elena. It'll be fun. Translation. It's embarrassing. Said Bonnie. Really, Bonnie? Demanded Caroline. Remember the time we ran naked across campus? Said Bonnie. Or when you convinced me to play peekaboo with Matt? Said Elena. What's peekaboo? Questioned Rebecca. It's when you hide in the backseat of someone's car and pop up naked after they get in. Said Bonnie. Hey, you lost your virginity that night, which is what you wanted, I might add. Said Caroline. Okay, now I'm curious and there's not much that scares me. Said Rebecca. Nope, not telling. I could always compel you. Said Rebecca. Wouldn't work. You may be stronger than me now, but we all know I'm a higher level existence. Said Caroline, causing Rebecca to scowl. Care, just tell us. Said Elena. No, you'll get scared and ruin my plans. Said Caroline. Care, I promise we won't ruin anything. Don't we always go along in the end anyway? Said Bonnie. It took me 3 years to get her to kiss me. Exclaimed Caroline. Wait, what? Questioned Elena, stunned. Lesbian friend necklace, remember? Questioned Bonnie. Wait, you knew? Demanded the doppelganger. She didn't try to hide it. You've just always been oblivious. Said Bonnie, shrugging. Okay, we'll talk about this later. Now what's the plan? Said Elena, starting daggers at Caroline. Fine, but you two have to pinky swear you'll go along with it. At this, Bonnie and Elena shared a look before sighing and approaching Caroline, with the three girls linking their pinkies before lifting and kissing their hands. Once done, the three girls broke the link, with Caroline smiling as the two girls stepped back. All right, enough suspense. What's the plan? Questioned Rebecca. I asked Naruto to set up a pair of tripods in his room. Said Caroline. You want to film us? Meanwhile, at the boarding house, Naruto could be seen putting the final touches on his outfit. While the dance was 70s themed, he refused to wear bell-bottoms or anything overly flamboyant. Because of this, while his outfit of choice still fit the theme, it was also relatively low-key. He wore a pair of black pants, a white shirt that was only halfway buttoned up exposing the center of his chest, a white sports coat, and a white 70s-style Kangol apple cap. Around his neck he wore a simple golden rope chain to complete the outfit, but wouldn't be too loud. Accurate, came a voice that he recognized as Damon's. I'd heard you'd enjoyed the 70s. Said Naruto. I had a blast. 60s as well. Sucks you missed Woodstock. Seeing Jimi Hendrix live. Man, you had to be there. Said Damon. So what brings you by? Questioned Naruto. Carol Lockwood asked me to pick up the Wickery Bridge sign from Alaric's apartment. It's gone. I tossed the apartment and called Liz to look into it, said Damon. Damn it, Esther. Said Naruto with a frown before shaking his head and addressed Damon. Okay. Good job. Making it look like a break-in will give us a bit of cover. What did you do with his weapons? I left them. Liz knows he's a hunter, so the people she sends will be in the know. Said Damon. Naruto sighed before creating a clone that vanished upon creation, as it already knew its job. Later that night, Alaric and Esther could be found walking through the cemetery towards the savageThor tomb. So why are we here? Questioned Alaric. Long ago, on this spot, my son tore my heart from my chest. The violence of my death marked these grounds for all time. Said Esther as they entered the tomb, where a ceremonial bowl was already sitting on top of a small table. I'll need your ring, said the woman, causing him to scoff. Now why on earth would I give up the one thing that protects me from death? Said Alaric. I'll give you all the protection you need. Unfortunately, the stake will burn up in the body of its first victim. If you are to kill all of my children, I will need to bind the protective magic in your ring to the stake, thus rendering the white oak indestructible. Alaric frowned as he looked down at his ring and played with it. The ring was the last thing he had from Isabel, everything else he'd given to her parents. Before he had discovered its protective enchantments, he'd known that removing the ring would mean that his marriage was actually over, and he'd have to move on. Now Isabel was actually dead, she wasn't running around as a vampire anymore, and his original purpose for becoming a hunter was fulfilled. Sure, he was in this current mess, but as far as he was concerned, his hunting days were pretty much over. Sighing, he removed the ring and handed it to Esther, only for it to be dropped unceremoniously into the bowl. Immediately she began chanting in a tone so low he could only barely hear what she was saying. He could only watch warily as she continued to chant, and a burst of flame appeared within the bowl, causing a sweltering heat even from just a small source and melting the ring into a liquid state in only a few short moments. Once melted, the flame vanished, taking the heat with it as if it had never even been there, while Esther calmly lifted a stake made of white wood and stirred it in the bowl. As she removed it, he could only watch as the liquid traveled up the stake until it ran all over it like veins before the liquid hardened into solid metal once more. "The ultimate weapon, for the ultimate hunter," said Esther. As she handed it to him, Esther was not prepared for him to quickly flip and embed it into her chest. "I told you I didn't want to be involved," said Alaric. As she fell, she mouthed a single word which caused him to collapse with a scream of pain. The Founders' Council had been gathered together for one of their regularly scheduled meetings. So far they had covered a range of topics, most of which were quite mundane. At this point, however, they were now on to the more supernatural topics and were currently going over the results of using vampire blood in hospitals. Furthermore, while it heals wounds extremely well, research has shown that diseases such as cancer are only worsened by the introduction of vampire blood. Because the blood spreads so quickly, it can take a stage 1 patient and make them terminal in a day, said Meredith Fell, a doctor at Mystic Falls Hospital, concluding her report. "I still don't like this. Those demons are an affront to God," said Pastor Young, scowling. "Not really," said Abby Bennett, one of the newest members of the council, getting the room's attendance. "It's a well-known fact that the first vampires, those known as the originals, were created as such in order to defend themselves against werewolves. The witch who created them made several mistakes, one of the biggest of which was using sacrificial magic. As such, instead of just giving them the power to defend themselves, she in all actuality cursed them. It's actually quite tragic when you know all of the details," said Abby. "Yet they are soulless creatures," said the pastor. "Wrong again. They still have their souls and their memories of being human. Vampires actually feel their emotions much more intensely than we do. Something that would be a minor annoyance to us would be much more to them. Something that would depress you would drive them to despair. Because of this, they have the ability to simply turn off their humanity. For them, it's like flicking a light switch, and until they turn it back on, they feel none of their human emotions. Everything they do is pretty much driven by their more primal instincts and natures at that point." "Primal? Are you equating them to animals in that state?" questioned Liz. "It's an apt comparison. Do you think a lion or bear feels bad for its prey?" The dance was already underway by the time the group arrived. Jeremy had actually been the first to arrive with Anna, on an actual date approved by Vicky. Stefan had been the second to arrive with Amy Bradley on his arm, much to the surprise of several students. Naruto arrived next with Bonnie, while Caroline, Elena, and Rebecca all rode together in Caroline's car. They entered as a group, Naruto, with Bonnie and Rebecca on his right and left respectively, while Elena and Caroline walked just behind them, arm in arm. It was Matt who stole the show and got tongues wagging as he entered with his date, Miley Cyrus. Upon seeing this, Naruto could help but laugh and nod at his son's rather brilliant move. Caroline and Elena were both stunned, and Bonnie was trying not to laugh at the looks on their faces. The dance itself was actually quite enjoyable for the most part, especially for Rebecca and Miley, who, due to their rather different but special circumstances, had never been afforded the luxury of attending such events. Naruto managed to talk both Bonnie and Miley into hopping on stage, and both had left the students stunned. Miley performed a cover of Dolly Parton's hit Son Jolene, and Bonnie one of her own songs called Sauce before they did a duet of the Jacksons' I'll Be There. Judging by the number of phones that emerged, Naruto had little doubt that videos of the two of them would definitely be online by the morning. When the dance started winding down, the entire group relocated back to the boarding house. They all hung out for a little while before first Jeremy and Anna, then Matt and Miley called it a night and left before Stefan took Amy up to his room. Elena had been surprised that she honestly felt no jealousy in knowing that two of her exes were about to go fuck girls that weren't her. Upon entering Naruto's room, the girls had all blinked before rounding on a giggling Caroline, causing Naruto to raise a curious eyebrow. "They were bugging me, so I told them there were video cameras set up for us," said Caroline. "We are still having the orgy though, right?" questioned Rebecca. Lemon warning. Not even 2 hours later, and Elena was wondering if they'd bitten off more than they could chew. Things had started off well enough, though Bonnie and Caroline had been stunned seeing Elena smoking but had partaken in the weed and alcohol that followed. When Elena and Caroline had started making out, they had pulled Bonnie in with them, leaving Naruto and Rebecca to themselves. Naruto and Rebecca had watched them strip down only to their underwear during their drinking game, which made it easier for him to play with her body. There had been a moment that everything stopped when Naruto's cock came out, as 3 of the 4 girls had been stunned at the size of it. Naruto was simply put huge. Watching Bonnie just casually reach over and stroke it reminded her that Bonnie had by this point been handling it for a year. "This bitch has been holding out on us," said Caroline, stunned. Bonnie had simply smirked at them before leaning over and taking him in her mouth, taking it all the way to the base and holding there, causing 3 sets of eyes to widen before she pulled back. "How the fuck?" started Elena. "You'll learn," said Naruto in a tone that caused even Rebecca to shiver. When Bonnie pulled back, his shaft was shining, and Elena's attention was pulled away as she pulled her into a hard, possessive kiss, dominating her mouth in the process. When she broke with Elena, she did the same to Caroline, and from there things were a blur. She remembered turning her attention to Naruto again just in time to witness Rebecca's very first attempt at sucking cock, where she gagged and pulled back almost immediately. Then her attention was pulled to Bonnie again, who startled her face, and then she was getting her first taste of Bonnie and she felt Caroline's tongue on her. Now looking around, she could see Rebecca panting heavily, fully naked, and cum leaking out of her, and Naruto had moved on to Caroline, whose eyes were rolled in the back of her head as Naruto pulled her hair and fucked her from behind. Elena felt her hair being pulled. Bonnie kissed her again before her head was directed down between Rebecca's legs. The next thing she knew, she was being impaled on Naruto's cock, which immediately sent her into an orgasm. Unlike Stefan, who was always tender with her, and Matt, who had been learning just like she was, Naruto fucked her hard from the start. There was no building up to it, just an immediate pussy pounding. He spanked her, pulled her hair, and choked her through she didn't even know how many orgasms before he was coming inside of her, and she was slumped on top of Rebecca. As she slumped and panted, Naruto hardly even needed to move, pulling out of Elena and immediately entering Rebecca. With Elena on top of her, it wasn't long until Elena was stirring once more, and as she moved to get up, Naruto spanked her again. "Keep that ass right there. I'm not done with you," said the blonde. As if to reinforce it, Rebecca wrapped her arms around her, holding her in place even as she cried out, and another orgasm rocked her. Sliding out of Rebecca, he went right back into Elena, pounding her hard. "Bite me." The words had hardly registered to his ears, mostly because he was too busy enjoying himself. Looking up, he could see Elena kissing along Rebecca's neck. "Please bite me. Stefan would never do it," said Elena. Rebecca, apparently just as lost in the moment, didn't even hesitate before her fangs emerged and sank into her neck, sending Elena into an explosive squirting orgasm. Rebecca's fangs retracted almost immediately as Elena slumped over, panting. Smirking, Naruto created 3 clones, surprising all 3 girls and causing Elena to whimper. Chapter 21. Niklas Mikhailson sipped slowly from a glass of bourbon as he stared into the flames within the fireplace. While not normally one for such a pastime, he was currently feeling somewhat introspective. He had once more delved into the memories that Haley shared with him, and while it seemed simple, it truly wasn't. Sansa was truly powerful and had made it so that Haley had not just seen the memories but experienced them along with all of the emotions that came with them, and as such, once they were shared with him, Klaus felt the emotions of his own counterpart as well. It was made even more complex by the fact that they saw things from an outside point of view and as such saw not just their own actions but every action of note. In truth, he hadn't wanted to dwell on the memories, things had already diverged from that path. Talking with Marcel, however, had been harder than he was anticipating and had left him feeling somewhat melancholy and sent him adrift into his memories. Rather than just dwelling in the past, his mind had wandered into those that had been given to him by Haley, and he found himself studying them from every angle. The most obvious thing was that Naruto had not been a factor in that life. In fact, from what he could discern, it was as if Naruto hadn't even existed, which caused a string of changes. That future, he decided, would not be coming to pass. While there were some good points, it was not the future he envisioned, nor one that he would accept with the forewarning he'd received. Some things had thankfully been taken care of already. The Strix, for instance, was no longer a threat. Not only had their numbers been decimated, but they were now rather firmly under the control of Elijah and Amelia. He knew, though, that new challengers would rise when they learned that the death of an original would lead to the destruction of the entire bloodline. Finn, after all, would not be in this world much longer, and even if his death wasn't permanent, it would still have massive consequences. Then there was Cole, who, as much as it galled him, had actually been right more often than not. However, as he was the youngest of the boys, his counsel had often gone ignored, especially considering their past history. Rebecca, he knew, would not be a vampire for much longer, though he had no idea what her transition would mean for the survival of her bloodline. In the best-case scenario, it would destroy all in her sire line, and in a worse case they would all survive but be free of her influence. Her relationship with Marcel was also decidedly over, and it was a good thing he'd found out about them summoning Michael to New Orleans some time ago, as he may have snapped if he discovered that information from the memories. That left Elijah, who was now married to Amelia and doing quite well as the head of the family, a position that Klaus himself had never claimed, though everyone had known he was in charge. Elijah was still his closest confidant, but they had things they needed to work on with him. He couldn't let him continue to hide under the facade for too much longer. Then there was Haley. She had been affected just as he had from the memories. There was an aged look in her eyes now, one gained by experience, and while their interactions had changed somewhat, they were actually closer than they had been before. It helped that she knew not just his actions, but his motivations and thought processes from that altered timeline. He would admit that Haley had in time become a wonderful partner, a Mikhailson in all but name, and had been seen as one of them as well. It was clear that she wanted facets of that future, or rather the most important part of that future, and Klaus would be lying if he said the opposite. Now that he knew what was possible, he actually yearned for it, but there were further changes he intended to make on his path to the future. Doing anything less would be a failure on his part. "How long are you going to skulk, little wolf?" said Klaus. Behind him, Haley froze before sighing and making her way over, settling beside him on the couch. Wordlessly he handed her his glass, which she sipped from slowly before returning it. "You're plotting," said the girl after a few moments. "I am indeed, love. Well, we have a rather large list of targets. Who's first?" said Haley. Yes we. I never thought about that kind of future for myself, but after what I've seen, I wanted Klaus. I want her, and I know you do too," said Haley softly. Klaus said nothing, merely taking a sip of his drink and looking back into the fire. "I'm sorry," said the girl, catching his attention. "I was scared. I thought you'd discard me, maybe even kill me once I was no longer useful. I let the words of others and my fears control me so much that I didn't even recognize how you treated me, how often you showed me you cared even if you couldn't say it," said Haley. "Conversation has never been my strong suit, but there are differences between our lives and theirs," said Klaus. "That's true. You are a lot more open than the other version, more accepting of others and of yourself," said Haley. "You're not as rash and hard-headed as your counterpart either," said Klaus, smirking. "We're not them, not exactly, at least not anymore," said Haley. "I'll not bring another bastard into this world," said Klaus, and Haley froze. "While I am still in need of an heir, I'd like a legitimate heir, a proper princess," said Klaus. "Are you saying what I think you are?" questioned the woman as she found herself on the verge of tears from the emotional whiplash. I am. After all, every king needs a queen. Haley, no longer able to contain herself, pounced on him and proceeded to place a massive kiss on him. Naruto left the boarding house early that morning. The girls had all left to help with the cleanup of the school after the dance, leaving him to his own devices. He thought he'd get to take a bit of time to himself, at least until one of his clones found Esther's body and dispelled itself to alert him. That was how he found himself standing within the savageThor tomb with Elijah, who he'd called to collect the body. You don't seem surprised by this outcome, said Naruto, frowning. Truthfully, I'm not. This is why I tried to warn her not to continue her plotting. The stubborn woman wouldn't listen, said Elijah. What will you do now? Questioned Naruto. Take her home, put her in one of the coffins. You. Nothing. She's been removed from play, which only leaves Alaric. I've already given all of you the means to be his superior in every way, said Naruto. Actually, I believe there is another action you can take, said Elijah, causing him to raise an eyebrow. Tyler Lockwood would admit, if asked, that he was glad to have his powers back. While he'd enjoyed the last few months of football and winning the championship, he hadn't been able to resist removing the seal for too long afterwards. It was actually quite the simple process, as Naruto had gifted him a ring that, when worn, sealed all of his powers and reduced him to a normal human state. The ring itself was nothing special, a simple silver ring with an onyx stone, which worked as they hadn't wanted to draw attention to it. He had felt he'd needed to remove it, if only to learn to control his new powers, and he had more than enough time to train them now that the season was over. He hadn't completely discarded the ring, however, as he'd discovered his workouts while wearing it had definitely had some results and had decided to stick with it for more aspects of his training. He'd actually been in the middle of a training session when he learned that Klaus wanted to see him, which is why he was now making his way through the Mikhailson mansion. Upon arriving, he was surprised to see Alina's car in front of the mansion, but shrugged off his curiosity as he was soon greeted and directed to the library by a girl he recognized as another hybrid named Kim. Entering the library, he found Klaus was alone, which was actually quite rare now that the rest of his family were free of their coffins. You wanted to see me? Questioned Tyler. I do. Have a seat, said Klaus. I hear you've become quite the gym rat recently, already preparing for college. Yeah, my natural strength needs to be a lot greater if I want to do well in college, let alone go pro, said Tyler. Is this why you still wear that ring? Questioned Klaus. Yeah, you know it seals my powers. Doing any training with this thing on helps me build my natural strength and in turn increases my hybrid abilities. And being in such a state for so long doesn't bother you? Not really. I mean, it's noticeable, but I wasn't a werewolf that long and I've been a hybrid for even less time, said Tyler, shrugging. Yet it has been long enough that you've managed to break the sire bond. How? Questioned Klaus, eyes narrowed. It was Naruto's idea, actually. In order for me to come home, he needed to trust I was both in my right mind and had at least some control in my wolf form. The sire bond was a complication, so it had to be broken. As for how, it was an extremely painful process. I had to force myself to turn somewhere around 100 times before the bond broke, said Tyler. Klaus inwardly winced at willingly going through that amount of pain, at least before he frowned. He'd been trying to break the sire bonds the hybrids were under for months, but maybe he'd been thinking about it incorrectly. Vampires were sired due to having feelings for their sire when they were human, feelings which being a vampire magnified. In hybrids it seemed to work differently, as Klaus hadn't known any of them really before turning them, yet they were all sired to him immediately. He'd learned a lot about being a wolf from his father and yet somehow still hadn't come to the answer until now. The hybrid sire bond was created by a combination of things. One was the hardwired loyalty all werewolves were born with and the gratitude they most likely felt due to no longer being forced to transform. I want you and Haley to take the others someplace isolated and have them break the bonds, said Klaus, surprising Tyler. You sure? I mean, couldn't you use the extra muscle with whatever your mom has planned? Questioned Tyler. I'll be fine. Our comrades, on the other hand, are no good to us without their free will, said Klaus. Okay, tomorrow morning work. It does. I'll inform Haley when I see her. Taking the dismissal for what it was, Tyler got up and left, yet wasn't gone for more than 4 minutes before Klaus heard him calling for him and Elijah. Frowning, he left the library and moved towards the voice with purpose, only to find him pinning Finn to the floor. Your explanation for this had better be a good one. The voice of Elijah came before he himself could speak. How about the fact that he has Elena in there nearly completely drained of blood? She was awake and called me. When I tried to get her out, he snuck up on me and found himself in this position, said Tyler. Take her and go. Offer her our apologies and inform her this will never happen again, said Elijah, moving over so that he stood over the pair. Tyler moved quickly, grabbing Elena and lifting her into a bridal carry, only to stop at Klaus calling him. When she wakes, remind her I am in her debt and she only has to call for it to be paid, said Klaus, getting a nod before he quickly left the room. You brother have some explaining to do, said Elijah. Cole Michelson was the youngest of the surviving Michelson brothers. He was also the wildest. Secretly, Cole detested his existence as a vampire. Before his mother forced such an existence on him, he'd been a magical prodigy and the only one of the Michelsons to activate their magic. This, combined with the damage done to his relationships with his siblings, caused him to hold them all in contempt, especially after their many betrayals over the centuries. He much preferred his new existence. While still a vampire, he was alive once more, with a beating heart, functioning lungs and all. Best of all, he'd regained access magic. It wasn't the same as it was before, where he'd been drawing power from nature. Instead, he was generating the power himself from what had been named a magical core. He'd taken time to refine the use of the ability, something he knew Elijah and Rebecca had not done. Sure, they could tap into it and use it, but he'd wanted to master it. He'd also taken the time to work on some of his other abilities. The serum he'd taken had made him just as strong as Marcus or Amelia, except as he was not a hybrid, he didn't develop the more animalistic features that Marcus had, with the exception of the wings and claws. The reason for this was because the serum had been derived from Celine's blood, as she was an enhanced vampire, though it had been even further enhanced in order to grant him those attributes. Alongside this, his already present vampire abilities had been enhanced tremendously. Strength, speed, agility, all of it had needed training in order to be dialed back, as had his senses. Thankfully, his emotions had actually been balanced. Instead of swinging from one extreme or another, it was like he'd finally surfaced after drowning for centuries. One thing he had to work on, however, was controlling his bloodlust. Unlike his siblings, he'd never bothered to learn to do so. He'd known he was a monster from the day they were forcibly turned, and he could no longer access magic. Eventually, the part of him that was a thrill seeker embraced this truth and the rush his power gave him. While the others felt their bloodlust and cravings decrease, Cole felt no such difference. This turned out to be purposeful, as Naruto had wanted him to learn this lesson as the rest of his siblings had. It had taken months for him to gain the level of control the others possessed, and only then did he feel that difference. So will I get all of that? The speaker was a young-looking woman who had the beauty of a model. She had long legs and stood at 5 feet 7 inches with long and thick shiny dark brown hair, hazel eyes, large breast, and a waistline that enhanced that further. Though she went by the name Amira Watson now, he knew her as Wolfhilda, daughter of Athelred II. She had been the first person he'd ever turned. They had secretly been lovers for nearly 2 years by that point, and when her husband died in battle and his killer tried claiming her as a prize, she'd surprised everyone by drinking poison. By that point, his blood had been in her system, and he'd merely had to wait for her to transition after she died. They traveled together for years, though he kept her well away from his siblings, people she herself had been keen on avoiding as much as she could. Currently, they were in a townhouse apartment she kept in London. Apparently, she had compelled the landlord to rent her the place, though she paid all of the bills and utilities herself. Sorry, love, they didn't make that many like mine. Yours is a cut above the standard variation though, said Cole, producing a purple vial, causing her to speed over only for him to move the vial out of her grasp. Word of warning, this will put you out for a bit. It will play with your body and would be quite painful if you were awake, said Cole before handing her the vial. Will you stay with me? Of course I will. Smiling, she pulled him down to the couch before downing the vial and slumping unconscious on his chest. Smiling softly, he placed a light kiss on her head before reaching for the remote and turning on the TV only for his phone to ring. "Oh bloody hell," said Cole, frowning upon seeing who was calling before answering. "Elijah, how can I help you?" "I'm calling to keep you informed. The situation with Mother has been taken care of. Unfortunately, the one with Alaric is still in development. You know, one day you lot are going to learn to listen to me," said Cole. "Perhaps. How much longer will you be away?" "A few days more. Allow me to offer counsel of my own. Take this time and propose to the poor girl. She's waited long enough." "How long have you known?" "For quite some time now. As wily as you are, I am still your elder brother. I expect to see the both of you soon." With that said, the line went dead. "Smug son of a bitch," said Cole, shaking his head with a small smile. Alaric's whereabouts did not go unknown for long, as they soon discovered he was in the school. The discovery was made because he attacked Stefan, who despite the surprise attack was able to fend him off thanks to the combination of Naruto's training and the death dealer training he underwent with Selene over the summer. At the moment he, Naruto and Damon could be found at the boarding house while the Michelsons were attending the meeting via speakerphone. "So let me see if I have it straight. Not only is he immune to white oak, but he's got a white oak stake that's impervious to damage, sunlight doesn't kill him, and he was able to easily overpower Rebecca," said Klaus. "That sums it up," said Damon. "Well, if she did nothing else in the short time she walked this earth again, she at least gave us a decent opponent," said Elijah. "You're not worried?" questioned Stefan. "Not at all. You managed to fight him off on your own, and you're still a fledgling, not even into your second century." Elijah. "I agree, I'm young, Elijah, but I think I'm worth a little more than a fledgling," said Stefan. "No, not yet. Learn control and then we'll see what your actual worth is," said Elijah. "You sound like a man with a plan," said Damon. "In fact, we do. Considering the stake didn't kill him, we can be certain the daggers will have no effect. As such, things will have to be resolved in a more brutal manner," said Klaus. "Speaking of brutal, I've heard quite a tale involving Finn today." "Where is he?" questioned Naruto. "Indisposed. Rest assured, Niklas and I were quite displeased by his actions and have informed him that despite Alina's nature as a doppelganger, she is more than just a human blood bag," said Elijah. "What exactly was he working on that required so much blood?" questioned Damon. "A spell, one meant to unlink our sister Freya from Dahlia's control," said Elijah. Anything else was stopped as Naruto's phone rang, and frowning he picked it up to find it was Elizabeth Forbes before telling everyone to be silent. "Hey Liz, you're on speaker," said Naruto. "You were right. Alaric just ambushed us at a council meeting. Luckily we signed the treaty last night, so our hands are tied. Unfortunately he outed everyone. Luckily Caroline had you seal her powers, so they're fine with her. Tyler was more begrudging, especially since he's a hybrid, but the seal he has won some people over. Stefan and Damon they are definitely not happy with. If not for Abby mentioning you were looking into a cure for those two, you'd have deputies racing to you now. You need to end this and fast before things start spiraling. Also watch out for Pastor Young. The man stormed out of here in a huff and he's the type to take matters into his own hands." "Got it. Thanks for the heads up. Do you need anything? Considering I've just been suspended, I need a drink. Come see me when you wrap this up," said Liz before she ended the call. "Niklas, when you run into Alaric, do inform him of my displeasure," said Naruto. "Honestly, I'm surprised you're not more upset," said Damon. "Oh, I'm furious. I'm just a master of controlling my emotions. I was a shinobi before I became a kitsune, remember? You sure you don't want to kill him yourself?" questioned Klaus. "No, he only inconvenienced me, but it's not something I was unprepared for. Besides, picking on the weak is boring," said Naruto. The hospital waiting room found a rather nervous group consisting of Jeremy, Bonnie, Matt and Tyler, who were all waiting for news of Elena. After Tyler rescued her from the Michelson house, he'd taken her home as she'd insisted that she was fine. It hadn't been until later that Jeremy had found her passed out in the kitchen bleeding from her nose and rushed her to the hospital. After arriving, he'd been a bit restless and called Bonnie, who came with the others. He'd also called Jenna, who would have rushed over from Chesapeake if he hadn't calmed her down and told her he would keep her posted. Having finished school, she'd landed a job quickly but had to be on the job at least 9 months before she could transfer and work from home. All of them perked up and stood as Meredith Fell walked over to them, as they knew her thanks to her relationship with Alaric and as a member of a founding family was in the know regarding the town's supernatural elements. "So Jeremy, you were right to bring her in. She took a nasty hit to the head. I won't go into details, but it was bad. Normally it would require a major operation, but I've been authorized to offer her a more experimental option," said Meredith. "No," said Jeremy, shocking all of them. "You know that's a better way. Especially since she's the only thing keeping that monster disguised as Rick alive," said Tyler. "I know, but I also know that they'll not settle for immobilizing him. The best way to neutralize him is to kill Elena, and if they caught her and that happened, she'd hate herself if she woke up as a vampire," said Jeremy. "You know he's right," said Matt. "Unfortunately, I don't think we have much of a choice right now," said Tyler. To say that Alaric had been displeased that his play to use the Founders' Council hadn't worked out was an understatement. He thought he'd been quite clever trying to use the council, only to find out he was several steps behind thanks to a treaty that had been presented and signed the previous night. Outing Caroline and Tyler had come out of pure spite to their mothers, and the rest had come tumbling out in his anger. So far the day had been a complete waste. If he'd managed to put the stake through Rebecca or Stephen, he'd at least have something to show for his troubles. Instead he had nothing, and if he was right, then the Michelsons would be fleeing town, forcing him to chase after them. Elena, figuring out that she was anchoring him to life and revealing it, had also pissed him off. The girl had absolutely no survival instinct. His thoughts on the matter were interrupted by his phone ringing, and glancing at it found it was from an unknown number. "Hello. I hear your time with my mother was productive. Klaus. I'm surprised. Didn't think I'd hear from you," said Alaric. "You shouldn't be. Did you truly think I'd let you get away with putting your hands on my sister?" "Yes. As much of a monster as you present yourself to be, we both know you're still that scared, weak little boy whose father used to beat him," said Alaric. "You truly have spent too much time with my mother. I'll enjoy arranging your next meeting personally." Mystic Falls Storage parking lot. It didn't take long for him to arrive, though the facility was closed, which wasn't a surprise considering the hour. As he walked through the halls and sealed storage units, he was greeted only by the sounds of his own footsteps. He found Klaus exactly where he said he would be, in the parking lot in the back of the building, sitting calmly on the trunk of a car. Using his newly gained vampire speed, he was standing about 2 feet in front of him in moments. "I'm impressed. I thought for sure you would try to ambush me," said Alaric. "You think that just because you were able to best Rebecca and Caroline that you can defeat me? Come on then, I'll show you why mine is the name that even monsters fear." Alaric remained silent at that, simply withdrawing the newly indestructible white oak stake, causing Klaus to grin nastily as he withdrew a combat knife. As Alaric shot forward, Klaus darted to the side and turned just in time to watch Alaric come to a stop with his hands resting on the trunk of the car before he turned to face him once more. Michael, he knew, would have slammed right into it at that speed, which meant that Alaric physically actually was on a higher level than Michael had been, at least as far as his powers were concerned. As Alaric charged once more and thrust towards his heart, Klaus sidestepped before stabbing him twice quickly, once in the extended arm and once in the side, before twisting and ripping the blade out, sending blood flying in the air. Ignoring both of his newly gained wounds, Alaric turned to face Klaus once more, finding him standing nearly 2 feet away and licking the blood free from his knife. "It's a bit thin. Normally I'd advise you eat more red meat, but it won't be an issue for you much longer," said Klaus. As Alaric charged forward, Klaus dodged again, only for Alaric to catch him by the arm, spin and toss him into the wall of the building. Before he could recover, Alaric was there, thrusting the stake towards his heart, which he stopped by catching the hunter's wrist with his left hand. As he struggled to force the stake down, Klaus brought his own knife up into his side and was surprised when the hunter didn't even budge, instead focusing his strength into overpowering Klaus and pushing the stake into his chest. The progress of the stake was halted when Klaus added his second hand to the struggle. Then Alaric faltered as he was kneed in the crotch. The stake was ripped from his hands and driven home into his chest. So you really are immune to the stake. Well made. It seems your end will need to be a bit more spectacular, said Klaus. Stefan and Damon had been assigned the duty of putting some distance between Finn and Mystic Falls. The eldest of the originals was currently sitting in the backseat quietly as he had been since he'd regained consciousness. You know what I don't get? You're supposed to be the most moral of the lot of you. You could have just asked and she'd have just given you some blood, said Damon from the driver's seat. Yes, she would, and normally I'd have settled for that, but this was not a normal occurrence, said Finn. What's that mean? Questioned Stefan. My method, whilst regrettable, was not without purpose. Elena Gilbert dies tonight, said Finn. I doubt that. If all else fails, Naruto's there, said Damon. He will not interfere, said Finn. You sound sure, said Stefan. I am. You see, as humans our parents didn't want us practicing magic, and as such we were for the most part untapped witches. Cole was admittedly something of a prodigy in the art, and mother taught him simply because they recognized he couldn't be stopped. I, however, had a particular skill that was the basis for my learning, precognitive dreaming, which in simple terms means I see the future in my dreams. Upon our initial transition I lost this ability, but after taking the serum and gaining a magical core it has reasserted itself, said Finn. Bullshit. If you had that kind of ability you'd have never been daggered, said Damon. Unfortunately I cannot perceive my own future. I have, however, seen yours. Your old friend Lorenzo will soon enter your life once more, said Finn, causing Damon to slam on the brakes and turn to face him. I don't know how you know that name, but that's impossible, he's dead, said Damon. You'll meet him again, Damon, soon, said Finn before turning his gaze to Stefan, who was also now facing him. You and Valerie will have 3 children. Okay, let's say we believe you can see the future, why tell us this? Questioned Stefan. It's too late for you to change it, as such you'll be unable to stop the event. Elena will be run off the road tonight and drown. Before today, what happened afterwards was in flux. My actions today have ensured that even though her time as a mortal is over, her time walking this world is not. Also, I apologize for leaving you for this next part. Before either brother could comment, the car was slammed into as it was T-boned on the driver's side, rocking them and sending the car rolling into a ditch. They must have passed out for a few moments because when they came to, Finn was gone. However, before they could comment, the two were pulled from the car and injected with vervain, causing them to pass out once more. As the brothers were loaded into a van, Finn watched impassively until it drove off before withdrawing a phone, and after searching through the contacts found one and selected it. Hello, came the answer. Mr. Donovan, I am calling to inform you that if you are not at the Wickery Bridge in 19 minutes at 52 seconds, Elena and Jeremy Gilbert will drown. You'd better hurry, said Finn before hanging up and vanishing with vampire speed. When Elena woke up, she was surprised to find herself in the passenger seat of what she recognized as her dad's Ford Escape, the car she'd been driving for the last year, with Jeremy driving. Jer, what's going on? Questioned the girl. Long story short, you were in the hospital. Blood loss combined with that hit to the head you took caused some damage, said Jeremy. You're taking me home? Questioned the girl. Nope. Out of town. You let slip in front of a Mikhailson that your life is linked with Alaric's. So we've decided to get you out of town until Rick's taken care of, said Jeremy. Rebecca isn't going to say anything. She owes me that much, said Elena. I don't know what you two got up to last night, nor do I want to, but she's a Mikhailson and you're not. That's all the evidence I need, said Jeremy. When did you become the protective one? Questioned the girl. When I stopped doing drugs and realized how crazy you've been acting. After this is over, you're going to therapy, by the way. Jenna agreed with me, and Naruto's going to take you to someone he trusts, said Jeremy before frowning. Okay, what's this idiot doing? The question had Elena following his gaze to find a car coming right at them on the same side of the road once they neared the bridge. Jeremy flashed the high beams only to get no reaction, and seeing no one on the other side he moved over only for the car to do the same. This guy's not serious right now, said Jeremy, moving back over only for the guy to do the same. As they reached the bridge, the car sped up and Jeremy swerved at the last second to dodge him. Breathing out sighs of relief, neither of them were prepared for them to be hit from behind, causing Jeremy's hands to jerk and sending them over the side of bridge. As they went over, the car that hit them kept going and sped off. The damaged bridge was the scene that Matt arrived at as his Eclipse slid to a stop, and jumping out of the car, he jumped through the broken rail and dove into the water, finding the escape sitting on the bottom of the river. His strength, enhanced by chakra, was enough to rip the door open, and he found Jeremy and Elena both inside, the latter of whom was the only one conscious. Jeremy was out and bleeding from the head as Elena was frantically shaking him before she spotted him and motioned for him to take Jeremy. Pulling a knife he kept on him, he made short work of cutting the seatbelt before handing it to Elena and pointing upwards, getting a nod from the girl, who quickly went to cutting her own seatbelt while he pulled Jeremy out. Breaking the water, he took a deep breath before moving them quickly to the shore and dropping Jeremy, who thankfully still had a pulse. A chakra-enhanced slap to the back had him coughing up water, and Matt was quickly diving back into the river. He froze, however, as he spotted Elena floating lifelessly about halfway between the surface and the car. Alaric grinned nastily as he pinned Klaus to the ground, forcing the stake down towards his chest while the hybrid tried to fight him off. Their battle had been fierce, and technically Klaus had already killed him 6 times, but none of that mattered as he finally found himself in optimal position on top of the hybrid with the stake poised to enter his chest and his heart. Suddenly he froze, his strength leaving him, allowing Klaus to push him off, where he landed unmoving and dropping the stake. Elena. This was all that he said before he died, his body turning gray while his veins thickened enough to be seen through his skin. Standing to his feet, Klaus scowled. That had not been a satisfying end to their battle. Alaric had certainly pushed him as he became a better fighter and got stronger the longer it went, despite the fact that he'd died so many times. Picking up the stake, Klaus eyed the man for a moment before withdrawing a lighter from his pocket, igniting it and dropping it on the body, watching it go up in flames. By the time the flames died down, only ashes remained and Klaus was nowhere to be seen. Chapter 22. Niklas Mikhailson had seen a lot in the 1,000+ years he'd walked the earth. He'd traveled the entire world, made his mark all over, and learned from many. Naruto had been his first real teacher and mentor, having stumbled across his siblings while Klaus himself had been suffering under the effects of the hunter's curse for 50 years by that point. Naruto had not only broken the curse but over a length of time restored both his sanity and humanity. Furthermore, he'd helped him build himself up from the damage Michael had been inflicting on his self-worth since his childhood. Even back then, Naruto hadn't hidden the fact that he was there at the behest of his birth father, but informed him until he'd broken the curse, locking away his true nature, he'd not be able to meet the man. It was during this time that he adopted the name Niccolo Anselmuccio, his way of acknowledging his birth father for the first time. Naruto had spent only 10 years with him, but they had been important years and had a massive impact on his life. One of the most important things that Naruto had taught him was to never stop learning. While they were immortal, the world was ever evolving, and as such they should be too. It was a lesson he'd taken to heart and one he'd put into practice ever since. He'd studied Kenjutsu in Japan, learned Kung Fu in China. In Rome he'd become a rather famous artist under the alias Michelangelo Merisi da Caravaggio. In New Orleans he'd been able to put some of his less violent lessons into practice, though learned more thanks to the mafia and their constant skirmishes. His name and reputation was known to them and had secured him an easy friendship with Al Capone in the short time he'd spent in Chicago, a connection that helped when he arrived in Las Vegas and decided to start fresh there. His time in Las Vegas had taught him patience, humility, and the importance of honor. All of this had prepared him for the day that he'd remove the daggers from his siblings, knowing they would mistrust him. The fact that Naruto had re-entered his life had sped up his plans of awakening them, but also given them a sense of security. Despite what Naruto had told Elijah, it had been Klaus who had recommended Elijah handle the talks with Marcus and Amelia, which laid the foundation for when he told them that Elijah should lead the family. He'd also been the one that had told Finn he should go to the new world Naruto told them of. It would allow Finn to build his strength in a less threatening environment, and when he returned it would be as if very little time had passed. His actions thus far had gone a long way to building a level of trust and camaraderie amongst the siblings, and even Cole had been forced to admit that what he'd built for them in Las Vegas would have been much harder, if not impossible, if he'd had to deal with all of them as well. Some things that happened he'd played no part in, yet they'd only contributed to his plans. Elijah marrying Amelia had not been his idea, but he'd pounced on the opportunity presented to tie the two bloodlines together more firmly. The vision of the future Haley showed him had forced him to re-evaluate and alter some of his plans, but in truth hadn't offered him any inconvenience. Proposing to her had been an emotional move that he'd done in the spur of the moment, but not an action he regretted. They'd both understood how much he'd grown to care for Haley in that future, and that he'd just been too emotionally damaged to say it, and his actions had sent mixed signals. There was of course Camille to consider, but he honestly felt she deserved a better life than to be sucked that deeply into the world of monsters that he inhabited. Haley had pressed him on Caroline though, and he'd been forced to admit that she would be harder to let go of. There was something about Caroline that resonated with him deeply, yet rather than be offended or get angry, Haley had shrugged and stated that Caroline had to be special, as she was the first person he'd cared about that he didn't consider family in centuries. His thoughts on the matter were brought to a halt due to the ringing of his phone, and picking it up he was surprised to see that the caller was Tyler. "Something must be urgent for you to call at this hour," said Klaus, not bothering to hide the warning in his tone. "Pastor Young made a move. He's ordered deputies to go after everyone. Stefan and Damon have both been captured. I'm on my way over. I'll slip out with the others on foot," said Tyler. "He's ignoring the treaty already," said Klaus, frowning. "Yes, which is why one of the deputies told my mom, and I'm telling you," said Tyler. "I see. Good work, and be quick," said Klaus before ending the call, before turning to face one of the hybrids named Hunter. "Get everyone up and ready to leave quickly. When Tyler gets here you are all going with him," said Klaus, getting a nod before he vanished with a burst of speed. Quickly he made his way through the mansion and into the guest room that Haley was staying in, waking her and quickly explaining the situation. "What are you planning?" questioned Haley, rolling out of her bed and grabbing a pair of jeans. "I intend for all of us to be gone by the time anyone arrives," said Klaus. Elena awoke with a gasp before groaning in pain, curling into a ball, and whimpering. "It's okay, babe. I've got you," came the unmistakable voice, causing her to open her eyes and see Caroline lying on the bed in front of her. "Where?" started the girl before trailing off. "You're at home, in your room," said another voice, causing her to look behind her to see Bonnie. "What's happening? Everything hurts," whispered Elena. "Yeah, it definitely sucks. Stop trying to fight it. You'll make it worse, trust me. Just relax your body and try to breathe in and out, no deep breaths," said Caroline. "Jeremy. He's fine. Matt got him out and breathing again," said Bonnie, causing Elena to actually slump. "Elena, I need you to listen carefully, okay?" said Bonnie, getting a nod. "There's no good way to say this. You're in transition, Elena," said Caroline, causing her eyes to shoot open. "I said relax. Don't try to move, you'll make the pain worse," said Caroline. "I don't want to be a vampire," said Elena. "You won't be. While you were in the hospital I gave Meredith the vial of Naruto's blood I kept on me," said Bonnie. "You'll be a kid just like me. We just have to get through the sucky part first," said Caroline. "Sucky," said Elena. "What you're feeling now, it's just the start. Your entire body is going to change. Your blood will feel like acid, your bones will break and remake themselves. This part really sucks," said Caroline. For the next several minutes the two girls tried their best to comfort the third member of their trio, and it worked, so much so the pain began to fade, and Elena thought that maybe Caroline had exaggerated. Then the pain returned with even greater power, and she screamed. The savageThor boarding house was dark and silent, which was no surprise due to the late hour. Outside the house a large group of masked men waited crouched by the door as one of them worked at picking the lock. There was a short click before the door was pushed open slowly. Guns were quietly unholstered as the group poured in, trying their best to make as little noise as possible as they crept into the house and split up into multiple teams. As three of them moved along the second floor, Naruto emerged from his room and they immediately opened fire only for him to vanish and appear behind the group before they all crumpled to the ground with their throats slit. Raising his right hand revealed it transformed with blood dripping from his now clawed hand. The blood had come from only one of them as the others had been dispatched by his other hand. The reason behind this was actually quite simple as Naruto brought the hand to his mouth and licked the blood from it, his eyes losing focus as the memories the blood contained flashed before his eyes. Blood sorting was the ability to view memories from blood, something he'd learned from Marcus, which was quite the cheat for gaining information. Once he'd seen the information he needed, his eyes regained focus and just in time as the sound of gunfire had attracted the attention of the rest of the men, causing them to rush back into the main room. Jumping over the railing, he landed behind what he now knew to be a pair of hired thugs and with a single knife hand separated their heads from the rest of their bodies. As the rest of them rushed into the room, Naruto took the time to wipe the blood from his hand before removing his jacket and placing it on a coat rack. Getting blood out of leather was a chore he had no desire to undertake nor force onto a cleaner. Pouring himself a drink, he took a sip before moving to the center of the room just as the more of the men entered. As a professional courtesy, I will allow you all this chance to leave. Stay and you die. You have 10 seconds, said Naruto, only for the men to respond by raising their guns, causing him to sigh and shake his head. Almost in unison, fire erupted from the pistols accompanied by thunderclaps as bullets flew through the air, finding purchase someplace on Naruto's body, most of which struck his torso while a few even hit his heart. When the shooting stopped, they were all surprised to find he was still standing and could only watch in horror as the bullets were actually ejected from his skin and fell to the floor at his feet, and he healed right in front of their eyes. GGGRRRRRR. The sound of growling caused several of them to step back in fear as he lifted his head, revealing blood-red eyes with black animalistic slit pupils. Flight or fight instincts kicked in and the men turned to run only to freeze in their places when they found him already standing in front of them. Naruto roared a sound that would haunt them even in death before he attacked, appearing in their midst, his clawed hand easily punching through one of them, coming out holding his heart, much to the horror of the others. Dropping the heart, he spun, flinging the body off of his arm and sending it crashing into two more. Leaning back, he dodged the bullet that would have hit him point blank in the head and in a single motion grabbed the arm holding the gun, broke it, turning the gun inward and made him shoot himself in the head. Snatching the gun, he spun, dodging another bullet and returned fire, kneecapping that one only for the gun to click when he tried to end him. Throwing the empty gun, he nailed one of the group in the head with it before sliding to the one he kneecapped and slashing across his throat with his claws. Stepping back, he grabbed the barrel of a shotgun, kicked the owner's knee, breaking it before snapping his neck. As the two men recovered and pushed the body off of them, Naruto met them with a shotgun blast to the chest, each sending them slamming into the wall. Dropping the shotgun, he looked up just in time to see three more men rushing into the room. Not even giving them time, he appeared in their midst, punching through two of them and removing their hearts, while the last turned just in time to be grabbed by the neck and have his spine ripped out. Despite the brutality of his actions and gruesomeness of the scene, it hadn't taken him long at all to dispatch his would-be assassins, and a show of even that little power hadn't truly been necessary. It had, however, been therapeutic, allowing him to burn off some of his frustration. Moving over to his jacket, which had no blood anywhere near it, he retrieved his phone and dialed a number by memory. Nico's. This is Naruto Uzumaki. I'd like to make a dinner reservation. How big is your party? 14. Nearly 45 minutes later, Naruto was standing outside as a pair of vans pulled up to the boarding house. Out of the vans stepped several burly men, and from the driver's seat of the lead van stepped an attractive woman with lightly tanned skin and black, wavy, shoulder-length hair which she keeps pushed back with a plaited hairband and a pair of red-framed glasses. Lord Naruto greeted the woman before motioning the men to head inside. You look good, Nico, said Naruto, getting a smile from her. Her outfit consists of a white tank top showing her midriff covered with a dark yellow sleeveless jacket that resembles welding cape sleeves. She wears blue denim shorts with a brown worker belt which she tucks a pair of heavy red heatproof gloves into one side of, with a pocketed tool belt slung on the other side, stabilized with a thigh strap. She also wears a pair of brown leather cowgirl boots with embossed patterning and tongue straps which were decorated with pistol cartridges. Good. I wore it just for you, said the woman cheekily. Careful now, I'd hate to explain to my nephew how you tempted me, said Naruto, smirking, causing her to laugh. Nicoletta, Nico, Goldstein was the wife of one of his nephews. Though she was not native to this world, instead she came from a world where he and Sasuke had actually been born as twins and was one of the two wives of Sasuke's son Nero. Still laughing, Nico turned on her heel and made her way into the house to supervise the cleanup. Stefan and Damon had grown bored not long after they were loaded into the back of the van. Contrary to the belief of their ambushers, the vervain hadn't actually worked on either of them, at least not the way they'd intended, as all it had done was make them a bit drowsy but not anywhere near enough to be incapacitated. Instead, they had faked as if it worked to see what would happen, but at this point, after nearly 2 hours, even Stefan had reached the point where he was just about ready to break free and put an end to the entire situation. As things stood, the only thing that had stopped the two was that they were gotten a free ride home. They'd arrived some time ago, so they knew that much, and had since been separated and secured inside cages within a barn. They were not on their own, however, as Rebecca had already been inside when they arrived. Apparently they'd ambushed her when she was leaving a friend's house. All right, I've had enough waiting. Let's just get out of here and kill everyone here, said Damon. Seconded, said Rebecca. Might as well, said Stefan with a sigh. In the next instant, all three had broken free of their restraints, vervain ropes. 3 simultaneous kicks had the cells forcibly opened as the doors fell off of their hinges, allowing them to simply walk through. Leaving the barn, they stopped, seeing Naruto standing outside with a pair of dead deputies on the ground. Well, I was wondering how long you three were going to pretend to be helpless, said the blonde. How long have you been here? Questioned Rebecca. 10 minutes, give or take, said Naruto, shrugging. Right then, let's get out of here, said Stefan. Not yet, we've got business to settle, said Damon. Wait, said Naruto. Hearing this, Damon turned only for Naruto to hold up his hand and point. Following the direction found them looking at a house on the property. They'd only been looking for a few moments when Naruto snapped his fingers. For a second nothing happened before the house exploded, much to their surprise. What the hell? Exclaimed Damon. It seems Pastor Young was holding a meeting with the council, the only ones not in attendance being the sheriff, mayor and Dr. Fell, who all miraculously avoided the tragedy of the gas explosion as they all had to work, said Naruto. I like it. Messy and clean at the same time, said Damon. What did he do to get that kind of response? Normally you'd have let us handle this, said Stefan. He tried to have me killed at the boarding house. The insult required the appropriate response, said Naruto. Elena entered the kitchen with a huge smile on her face as she pulled a figure behind her. The figure was an amused-looking Naruto, who suddenly picked her up, causing the 9-year-old girl to squeal in happiness as he spun her about before placing her down on a stool. Grandpa, why do you look so young? Questioned the girl. Because I'm special. Like me. Not exactly. You're special in one way and I'm special in a different way. What was Grandma like? She was sweet and kind. She was also very beautiful. You look just like her, said Naruto. Before she could ask another question, her mom walked into the room looking tired. Thanks for coming so quickly. I had no idea who else I could call, said the woman. It's fine. Accidental magic like that happens sometimes in stressful situations. No one else will remember anything, so it will be like the entire situation never happened. What about Elena? Questioned the woman, getting her daughter to perk up. She won't remember either. Thanks for indulging me, by the way. I wasn't having the best day. Getting to spend some time with you both really helped, said Naruto. Grandpa, what do you mean I won't remember? Questioned the girl, on the verge of tears, getting him to look over at her. Like I told you, I'm special. I can't stay around too long, and it's not fair to make you keep such a big secret, said Naruto. But you can't leave. I just got you, said the girl. It's okay. You'll see me again one day, said the man, kissing her forehead, causing her to immediately fall asleep. An older Elena, now 14, froze in place. Her progress to the kitchen halted at the noises she was hearing. Heavy breathing and low moaning, the type of which she recognized from the videos Caroline had shown her. Those noises shouldn't be happening in the house though, especially as her dad had gone camping with Jeremy. Creeping slowly to the door, she peeked around the doorway only to find her mother bent over naked, her large, heavy breasts swinging as a blonde man thrusted into her from behind. "At this point I think you want Elena to wake up," said the man, causing her mother to put a hand over her mouth to stifle the moaning. "She's going to come downstairs to get a drink and catch me fucking you," said the man before reaching down and pulling her hair, causing her to arch her back. "Then I'll have no choice but to fuck her too," said the man, causing her to shake her head rapidly. "You can watch me make her a woman, then you'll train her into an obedient pet like her mother and start by teaching her how to suck my cock," said the man, pausing as she shuddered in place. "Look at you coming at the thought of your daughter sucking me off." "You can't, she's too young," said Miranda softly. "I can and she's not. She's your granddaughter," said Miranda distantly. "We don't have a blood tie anymore. You know it's not nice to spy." The whisper was directly in her ear, causing her to jump, and she'd have screamed if her mouth wasn't hastily covered. She whimpered as she realized it was somehow the same man, or at least the twin of the man that her mother was currently in the kitchen fucking. "I can smell your arousal," said the man, causing her to blush. "Despite what you heard me say in there, our time hasn't arrived yet. It will happen soon enough, but for now you need to forget." The man tapped her forehead, and she slumped over unconscious. When she woke up, she was covered in sweat and a few other fluids. Climbing out of the bed was a bit of work, even though sliding out should have been easy, as both Bonnie and Caroline were in front of her on the bed, which had been expanded from its original size at some point. "Wait, I'll help you," came the voice of Caroline, causing her to freeze in surprise. With an ease that Elena was jealous of, she slid from the front of the bed, revealing she was dressed only in a tank top and a pair of shorts, and made her way to Elena, helping her stand up. "Sorry, didn't mean to wake you," said Elena. "I wasn't asleep. We were taking shifts watching you. Let's get you cleaned up. It's taking everything I have not to throw you down and have my way with you," said the girl. "Why am I so tired?" questioned Elena. "It's the transformation. The first one is exhausting. Your body literally remade itself. You also may not feel it now, but your muscles are sore as hell. You're pretty much a giant bruise." Before they left the room, Caroline raised her hand and created a soft orb of light, revealing that they were standing in front of her mirror. This mirror in particular was connected to her sliding closet door, and as such was a full-length wide mirror. The light gave her the chance to see herself, and for the first time she realized that she was naked. Ignoring that, her gaze was drawn to the pair of brown fox ears sitting on top of her head, and the pupils of her eyes were now vertical slits. She had a single fluffy brown tail with a black tip as well, but other than that she looked the same as before. Caroline taught her quickly how to change back to normal, and within a few minutes she was staring at her normal, human self. With that done, Caroline dismissed her ball of light and helped her into the bathroom. The next 2 weeks passed in something of a blur. For Elena, everything was a bit more intense. Smells were stronger, colors brighter, noises louder, etc. The first things she'd had to learn was how to tone down her senses to more manageable levels. Once she had a handle on that, Bonnie and Caroline had to help her get a hold on her magic once more, as she was far more powerful than she'd been previously, though still not more powerful than Bonnie. She had also followed Caroline's lead and had her kitsune form sealed away, leaving her mostly human until she lived out her human lifespan. One of Naruto's clones had been the one to do that, as Naruto himself hadn't been in town in all of that time. From what they'd been told, after cleaning up the mess caused by Pastor Young and the council, Naruto had left town to take care of other business. At the moment she was getting ready for the memorial of the council members that died on Pastor Young's farm. While truthfully she didn't really want to go, all of them were going, as to not do so would draw attention to them. Thankfully Jenna was back. She had worked the minimum time required for her, so she no longer had to work on site every day and now only went in twice a week, and while she'd only been back for a few days, she'd definitely been a welcome presence, which helped with Alaric being gone. Slipping her shoes on, she moved over to her dresser and grabbed her sunglasses before walking out of her room, and almost literally ran into Jeremy. "Finally, Jenna sent me up to get you," said Jeremy. Lucky I'm even feeling generous enough to go. Legally Blonde was getting ready to come on. Said Elena. Haven't you seen that movie like 5 times already? Questioned Jeremy. Remind me how many times you watched that Star Wars movie. Empire Strikes Back is classic. Elle Woods is a national treasure. Let's go you two, called Jenna, catching their attention. Naruto could be found in Lower Manhattan, New York, sitting within a booth in the lounge area of a hotel. He was in his adult form and wearing a black suit with a white shirt and a slim black tie, and after glancing at his watch he sighed before tossing back his drink and standing. Allowing a moment for the burn to die down and the drink to settle, he stood and left the room, stopping at a desk where a rather tall, bald black man was standing. Lord Naruto, I was just about to come to you. The meeting room you requested is ready. Shall I accompany you? Said the man. No, I think you should wait and escort my guest when he arrives. Said Naruto after a few moments. Very well, sir. Here is your key, room C. The manager is already there. Thank you, Karen. Leaving the man behind, he walked up the stairs to the second floor, and once up the stairs turned left, walking over to where another man stood beside a closed door. Upon his approach, the man gave a shallow bow before opening the door without a word, revealing a large meeting room with a single wooden table surrounded by high-backed soft brown leather meeting chairs with couches lining the walls. A man was already seated inside. He was an older man with combed back hair, clean-shaven, and wore a gray suit without a tie. At his entrance, the man stood from his seat to greet him. Lord Naruto, welcome back to New York. Winston, it's been some time. Said Naruto, shaking the man's hand. Indeed, in fact I hadn't thought I'd hear from you for a while more. Said Winston. Things have been running smoothly, there's been no need for me to interfere. Said Naruto. But there is now. Said Winston, frowning. Yes, this is me heading off a troubling situation. Said Naruto. Before Winston could comment once more, there was a knock at the door and it opened to reveal Karen and another man. This was a white man with long dark hair who stood at around 6 feet in height and, like everyone else, also wore a suit, though he wore a black turtleneck instead of a dress shirt. Mr. Wick, may I introduce you to the owner, Lord Naruto? This, sir, is John Wick. Said Karen. Well met, Mr. Wick, please have a seat. Said Naruto. I thought you were the owner, Winston. Said John while moving to take a seat. I never said that. I just never contradicted the rumor. Said Winston. Before we begin, you should know I'm retired. Said John after he sat looking at Naruto, who smirked. I'm well aware of your status, Mr. Wick, however allow me to clue you in on mine. Said Naruto, getting a shallow nod. I am not just the owner of this hotel, but of the entire continental chain. More than that, I am a seated member of the high table. Said Naruto. Has someone been replaced? Questioned John, looking at Winston. No. In truth, contrary to popular belief, there are not 12 seats at the table but 13. Lord Naruto is the man who sits in that final chair. Said Winston. I am also the man who connects the table with the law enforcement agencies throughout the world. As such, if it was wet work that I needed, there are others who I can call on. Said Naruto. Then what do you want from me? Questioned John. Honestly, I'm here to offer you my help. I know your wife is sick, John. Her doctors won't be able to heal her, but with my resources she will be able to fully recover. Said Naruto. In exchange for what? Questioned John. I have 2 positions I need filled. One is as a combat trainer and the other is a operations officer. This position is one who oversees the hotel's management for the managers, as it were, and you would also scout for additional locations. While this one requires far more travel, you would only need to do so once every month. The rest of the time would be yours. That's a generous offer, said John, surprised. The operations position would take you out of retirement. You would essentially become an agent of the table and a candidate to take a seat of your own one day. Said Naruto. Why me? Questioned John. Mr. Wick, I am a man who has an eye for talent and potential. Aside from your more obvious reputation and the skill that entails, you have another less recognized talent. Despite the world we live in, people seem to genuinely like and respect you. For someone who has no power over others and no leverage to sway others with, yours is a name that is spoken of by people on all levels. Winston can tell you how rare that is," said Naruto before standing from his seat. He pulled a card from his pocket and slid it across the table to John. "The offer's open, so there's no rush for you to start working. Call that number, tell them I recommended you, and they'll send a healer." "Good day, gentlemen," said the blonde before leaving the room. "What do you think?" questioned John once he was gone. "It's a great offer. Still, you've only been out of this life for 3 years, Jonathan, and as he said, there is no rush. Go home, talk to Helen," said Winston. "But he could have her healed?" questioned John. "Undoubtedly. Lord Naruto is a man with many resources, friends and abilities. Furthermore, only 2 seated members of the table have died of illness in the time I've run this hotel. Both of them were on Lord Naruto's bad side. Thanks to his ability to orb, returning to Mystic Falls was done easy enough, though he had needed to create a clone to go to a different location by plane. The criminal underworld being what it was, such precautions were needed, especially when dealing with people on that level. Still, it had been needed mostly because Pastor Young hadn't hired any thugs off the street to attack him, and he'd needed to find out how far the man's reach went. As it turns out, a cousin on his wife's side was Lorena Peragini, the wife of a priest in the Order of Light, vampire hunters tied to the Vatican. He had only barely finished with that when he got the call that if he didn't act soon, John Wick would go on a warpath against the table, and while certain people he wouldn't mind being rid of, there were others who would fall during the chaos that he'd like to have around. Grabbing himself a drink, he made quick work of changing his clothes to something that fit better to his teenage form, and once dressed made his way to the garage. The drive to the church went by pretty quickly, though finding a place to park was a bit more complicated. Thankfully, he found an open spot across from Caroline's Fiesta. He didn't see Bonnie's car or Alina's, so the girls had most likely come together. The front of the church was crowded as he suspected it would be, though it didn't take long for him to find his brothers on the edge of the crowd. Rose was on Damon's arm, which was nice to see as he hadn't known she was back in town. Didn't expect you to be back today," said Damon once he spotted him. "Things wrapped up quicker than I expected," said Naruto, accepting a hug from Rose before pulling away in time to accept Bonnie. "Glad you're back," said the girl softly. "Any problems?" "No, I just missed you," said the girl before they kissed lightly. Damon unfortunately chose that moment to pull him to the side and inform him that there was a vampire hunter in town, one who'd already gotten the drop on Tyler and shot him. Unfortunately, being a hybrid, Tyler survived the attack. Stefan had taken one of the wooden bullets to the Michaelsons, and they'd recognized it as belonging to a member of the Brotherhood of the Five. Frowning, he reached out with his senses, and while he couldn't detect the hunter, he could sense that Elijah was here, which meant that he likely wouldn't need to do anything himself. "Where are Matt, Caroline and Elena?" questioned Naruto. "Inside, they were all helping with the setup," said Bonnie. Meanwhile, inside of the church, Elena could be found washing her hands in the bathroom. She'd been helping one of her old friends, April, Pastor Young's daughter, with her speech when she felt the need to excuse herself. Honestly, she felt bad for the girl as well as the families of the other council members who'd been in attendance. Hell, she even felt bad for what happened with the members themselves, as she'd known them her entire life. She knew that April in particular was thinking about staying in town instead of returning to her boarding school, but she and Caroline had been trying to subtly steer her into going back. Mystic Falls just wasn't the safe, idyllic place they'd thought it was. After drying her hands and putting on a bit of lotion, a step Bonnie refused to let her or Caroline skip, she moved to leave and almost walked right into someone. He was a relatively tall man, just under 6 feet, bald with light brown skin and black eyes. "Excuse me, I'm Connor Jordan." "Well, Mr. Jordan, this is the ladies, the men's is down the hall to the left," said Elena. "Actually, I was wondering if I could speak with you for a moment." "I'm not interested, you're too old," said Elena, causing his eyes to narrow. However, before he could speak, another figure spoke. "Your interests have been rebuffed. You should let the young lady pass," came the voice that she recognized instantly as Elijah's. "Perhaps you can help me with my inquiries instead." said the man, turning to face Elijah and as such giving Elena the room to slip away. Before you speak, Mr. Jordan, you should be aware that your actions thus far have been incredibly reckless. And you are. I am Elijah McCalson. At this his eyes widened and in a quick motion he drew a pistol, only for Elijah to vanish and reappear with his pistol in hand. That was incredibly rude. Normally I would simply kill you for the insult, however that would put to waste the effort of bringing you here, said Elijah. Bringing me? You wanted me to come. Indeed. You see, we have come across a problem, one only a member of your brotherhood is capable of assisting us with. And why would I do anything to help you? Questioned Connor. It's simple really, we want you to kill Silas, said Elijah, causing his eyes to widen. The end. Thank you for listening. If you guys have any ideas for stories, just put it in the comments and I appreciate all y'all supports. Thank you.